Not everything buried by time was meant to be uncovered. Some truths echo through the ages, ... Carved into stone, hidden beneath layers of ash, spoken in languages long forgotten. Scattered across the globe are traces of a world we barely comprehend. Monuments crafted with precision that challenges logic. Artifacts that don't belong in their timelines. And entire cities that vanished without a trace. Their stories erased, their existence a mystery. Want to uncover more of what history left behind? Hit subscribe for deeper dives into the ancient unknown, and drop a comment. What mystery from the past keeps you up at night?
Who carved the stone spheres of Costa Rica, and why? What happened to the Sumerian city of Eridu, once called the cradle of civilization? And how did the builders of Baalbek move stones heavier than modern cranes can lift? These are not legends, nor the plots of ancient myths. They are real, catalogued, excavated, debated, and yet, the answers remain just out of reach. Tonight, we open the door to history's greatest enigmas, not to solve them, but to feel their weight, to listen closely to the silence they leave behind. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the shadowy corridors of time, where the past still waits to be understood. The heat rises in shimmering waves above the flat, arid plains of southern Mesopotamia. Today, this land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers is a patchwork of desert and marsh, its once thriving cities reduced to sand-swept ruins and eroded mounds. Yet, thousands of years ago, it was the beating heart of the ancient world. And somewhere beneath this scorched and silent earth, the city of Akkad, once the capital of the world's first great empire, remains hidden. No one has ever found it. At its height, Akkad stood as the center of power, commerce, and innovation. Founded around 2334 BC by the legendary Sargon of Akkad, it gave birth to the Akkadian Empire, an unprecedented political force that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Its influence shaped art, language, law, and military organization across the ancient Near East. Clay tablets speak of a city adorned with gleaming palaces, massive temples, and bustling markets. A city where scribes recorded laws in cuneiform and merchants traded lapis lazuli and cedar wood from distant lands. And yet, the ground has never yielded its remains. No definitive ruins, no towering ziggurat, not even a foundation stone carved with its name. For more than a century, archaeologists have searched, combing satellite imagery, analyzing ancient maps, excavating tell after tell. Akkad has simply vanished. How can a city so central to early civilization just disappear? Some suggest that its precise location has been masked by the shifting course of rivers. In antiquity, the Euphrates was known to wander, meandering, flooding, altering its bed by miles over centuries. Entire cities were left dry or drowned. Perhaps Akkad lies buried beneath silt, or under a modern town unknowingly built atop its foundations. Some scholars point to a site near modern Baghdad, others closer to Samarra, or even further west toward Fallujah. But no evidence has confirmed these guesses. The name Akkad has yet to emerge from the earth. There are clues, but they're fragmentary. Inscriptions from rulers who claim to be king of Akkad give hints of the city's grandeur and political reach. Later Mesopotamian texts, like those from Babylon or Assyria, refer to it in reverent, almost mythical terms, speaking of its rise and its mysterious fall. Yet the more the records tell us about Akkad's legacy, the less they seem to reveal about its actual location. Then, there is the question of its disappearance. Sargon's dynasty ruled for over a century, with kings like Naram Sin expanding the empire to its furthest limits. But then, Around 2154 BC, something changed. The empire fell. Akkad faded from power. Some blame internal rebellion. Others point to invasions by the Gutians, a people from the Zagros Mountains. But some texts suggest a far more dramatic cause. There is an ancient Sumerian lamentation, part poem, part historical record, that speaks of Akkad's downfall not as a political event, but a cosmic punishment. It describes the gods withdrawing their favor, rivers drying up, the earth cracking open, and winds carrying dust across the once fertile fields. Crops failed. Famine swept the land. Akkad was abandoned. Could it have been a climate catastrophe? Modern researchers think so. Around the time Akkad collapsed, there is evidence of a regional megadrought. Core samples taken from ancient lakebeds and soil deposits suggest that rainfall declined drastically across Mesopotamia and beyond. Agriculture, already dependent on fragile irrigation networks, would have failed. Starvation and migration would have followed. Entire cities might have been left to the wind and sand. And if the population fled, if buildings crumbled without repair, how long before a city disappears? Still, not everyone is satisfied with this explanation. Some fringe theories suggest that Akkad's disappearance was more than just environmental. They ask, why is there no trace of such an important city when lesser sites have been found and excavated in full? Why do later civilizations speak of it almost in mythical tones, as if it had passed into legend even by their time? A few propose that Akkad's disappearance reflects a deliberate erasure, by enemies, by successors, or even by its own people. A city razed and forgotten, not by accident, but by design. Others wander further into speculation, suggesting secret technologies, celestial curses, or a city swallowed by the earth itself. None of these ideas are widely accepted in academia. Yet the absence of hard evidence leaves a space, however narrow, for wonder. Perhaps the real mystery isn't just where Akkad was, but how it could be so completely lost in the first place. In a region so thoroughly studied, where aerial drones and ground-penetrating radar scan for signs of walls and roads, how can the heart of the Akkadian Empire remain invisible? Is it waiting just beneath the surface, mistaken for another settlement, another layer? Or is it gone forever, reduced to clay dust, scattered across fields no longer farmed? For now, Akkad lives on in texts, in stories, and in the lingering silence of the land that once cradled it. A capital of a vanished empire. A name written in stone, but never seen. What else lies hidden beneath our feet? What cities, what worlds, have we yet to rediscover? And just as the dust settles over the lost echoes of Akkad, we journey east, into the floodplains of the Indus River, where another ancient enigma awaits. A land of brick and water, of precise geometry and silent ruins. A civilization that thrived in harmony with its rivers, until, one day, it didn't. This is the story of the Indus Valley civilization. The ruins appear suddenly, flat, low-slung mounds scattered across the modern borders of Pakistan and northwest India. At first glance, they seem unassuming, but draw closer and an extraordinary pattern reveals itself. Long avenues run straight and true. Homes are built to identical proportions, aligned with the cardinal points. Beneath the streets, an intricate drainage system runs like arteries beneath the skin. In some areas, the sewers are covered, ventilated, engineered. Every brick is uniform, every angle deliberate. This wasn't just a collection of ancient villages. It was a planned urban world, older than Rome, older than Athens, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dolavira. Their names echo with the rhythm of time, but no one knows what they called themselves. Their writing, etched into thousands of seals and tablets, remains undeciphered. Their language? Lost. And yet, between 2600 and 1900 BC, they built one of the most advanced and widespread civilizations of the ancient world. A network of cities spread across more than 400,000 square miles, larger than Mesopotamia or Egypt at its peak. They practiced standardized measurement. They traded with distant cultures, including the Sumerians. They built homes with private baths, granaries that could feed thousands, and cities without the dominating palaces or temples seen elsewhere. But then, in a span of just a few centuries, it ended. The cities were abandoned. The streets went quiet. The bricks stopped being made. Trade networks collapsed. Writing ceased. Why? There are no signs of widespread war. No burnt layers, no mass graves, no fortifications overrun. The people didn't seem to be slaughtered. They simply left. Or faded. Historians have proposed many explanations. Some point to climate change. Around 2000 BC, the monsoon patterns that fed the great rivers began to shift. The once mighty Gagar-Hakra River, thought by some to be the legendary Sarasvati of ancient texts, began to dry up. Crops failed. Fields turned to dust. Without water, cities cannot breathe. Others suggest tectonic activity, earthquakes that subtly altered the course of rivers. If the Indus changed its path, or if flooding became unpredictable, whole urban centers could have been left without access to fresh water or trade routes. Life would have grown unsustainable. Then there is the theory of overuse, that the soil, farmed too aggressively, began to degrade, that the forests were overharvested for fuel and construction, that the civilization quietly exhausted the very environment that sustained it. But none of these explanations fully satisfy, because even as some cities declined, others continued for a time. In the south, smaller settlements persisted. People didn't vanish overnight. There was no singular moment of collapse. Instead, it was as if the lights slowly dimmed across the entire civilization, flickering out one by one. And still, we know so little about who these people were. Why did they build without monuments to kings or gods? Why is there such consistency in their urban planning, yet no known central authority? Was their society cooperative rather than hierarchical? Or is the truth hidden in a script we cannot yet read? Their writing system, if it was a script at all, is composed of brief inscriptions, often no more than a few symbols long. It appears on stamp seals, tablets, and pottery, but its brevity makes it nearly impossible to decode. Is it a full language? A set of sacred marks? A system of ownership? Until it's understood, we are left speaking about them, without ever hearing their voice. Some speculate about a great migration, that the decline of the Indus cities coincided with the arrival of Indo-Aryan groups from Central Asia. Ancient Indian texts, like the Rig Veda, speak of battles between light and darkness, of lost rivers and ancient cities. Are these poetic memories of the Harappan world distorted by time and myth? Others venture further. They ask, how could such a vast, organized civilization leave so little behind in terms of royal inscriptions, epic stories, or heroic statues? Was their culture centered on humility, anonymity, collective living? Or have we misread the silence entirely? Fringe theories inevitably emerge in the absence of answers. Some propose links to Atlantis-like legends of vanished civilizations. Others suggest advanced ancient technologies lost to time. A few point to the precision of the city layouts and ask, could the Indus people have inherited knowledge now forgotten? But none of these ideas hold weight without evidence. Still, the mystery endures. Perhaps the most haunting truth is this. The Indus Valley civilization lasted longer than almost any other ancient culture. Nearly 700 years of stability, innovation, and cooperation. And yet, when it ended, it left behind no legend, no tale of its own fall. No voice, only ruins. What does it mean that we remember Sumer's kings, Egypt's pharaohs, and Greece's philosophers, but not the names of those who built Mohenjo-daro? What wisdom did they carry that slipped through our fingers? What questions might their script answer if we could only read it? The Indus cities still sit quietly beneath layers of dust and earth. They are patient, undisturbed, waiting for the rains that once nourished them, or for someone to finally understand what they tried to say. And as the echoes of the Indus fade into silence, we move westward, toward the rugged highlands of Anatolia, a land of stone and wind, where mountains loom over dry plateaus and forests whisper through the valleys. Here, among the hills of central Turkey, lie the weathered ruins of a forgotten capital. Its ancient gates, carved with lions and sphinxes, once opened to a world power. Today, they lead only to broken walls and scattered stones. This is Hatusa, the lost heart of the Hittite Empire. More than 3,000 years ago, this city commanded one of the most powerful and enigmatic civilizations of the ancient Near East. The Hittites were masters of diplomacy and war. Their armies stood toe-to-toe with Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Their scribes wrote in cuneiform, preserving treaties and royal decrees in the cool darkness of clay tablets. Their reach extended from the Aegean Sea to the banks of the Euphrates. And then, they vanished. Not slowly, not quietly, but in a sharp and sudden collapse. By 1200 BC, the Hittite Empire had ceased to exist. Its capital was abandoned, its government dissolved. Its language, once spoken in royal courts and foreign embassies, fell into disuse. For centuries, the Hittites were known only as a whisper in the Bible, until modern archaeologists unearthed the truth, that they had once ruled alongside the likes of Babylon and Egypt, before being swept away by a storm no one fully understands. What happened? The records tell us little. A few final tablets from Hatusa speak of hardship, of food shortages, of pleas for grain, of military losses. But then, silence. The scribes stopped writing. The city stopped breathing. Archaeologists have uncovered layers of ash in outlying cities, evidence of burning, destruction. But Hatusa itself was not razed. It was simply left. The mainstream explanation is part of a larger pattern. Around 1200 BC, a wave of destruction rippled across the ancient world. This was the time of the so-called Late Bronze Age collapse, a sudden unraveling of great powers. Mycenaean Greece, Ugarit, the Kassite dynasty in Babylon, all fell. Cities were destroyed, trade routes broken, literacy declined. Even Egypt, though it survived, was scarred. Some blame the mysterious sea peoples, seaborne raiders who appeared seemingly out of nowhere, leaving devastation in their wake. Egyptian records depict them as fierce, unknown enemies. Could they have reached the Hittites as well? Possibly, but they remain unnamed in Hittite texts. We don't know where these invaders came from, or what drove them. Famine, war, migration, and even if they played a role, could external raids alone bring down an empire as vast and sophisticated as the Hittites? Others point inward. Climatic records show signs of drought around this time. Tree rings and sediment cores suggest that Anatolia may have suffered years, perhaps decades, of failed harvests. A society built on complex agriculture and grain storage might have been pushed to its limits. Famine breeds unrest. Starvation breaks armies. Could ecological collapse have hollowed the empire from within? There's also evidence of shifting power structures, internal rebellions, rival factions, local governors growing independent. As central control weakened, peripheral cities may have stopped obeying the crown. Without unity, even the mightiest empire can crumble. And yet, the fall still feels too abrupt. too complete. The Hittites were not merely weakened, they were erased. For centuries after their fall, the Anatolian highlands fell silent. No successor rose to take their place. No clear cultural continuity endured. Their archives were buried, their temples abandoned, their very name forgotten. This has led some to look beyond the accepted narratives. A few suggest that the Hittite elite may have anticipated their fall and fled, taking sacred knowledge, royal treasures, or ritual artifacts with them. But to where? And why would they leave no record? Others propose more speculative ideas, that perhaps the Hittites were victims of a deeper systemic collapse, a convergence of environmental stress, migration pressures, disease, and social fragmentation. A perfect storm that left no time for resistance, no space for recovery. And there are those who ask, how did a civilization that engaged in sophisticated diplomacy, signing one of the earliest known peace treaties with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh, disappear without even a recorded farewell? The Hittites left behind thousands of tablets, contracts, laws, correspondence, but not a single document explains their fall. And that silence, perhaps, is the loudest mystery of all. Today, Hatusa stands frozen in stone, its colossal gateways open onto landscapes where wheat no longer grows. Its temples are roofless, its royal halls echo only with wind. But walk among its foundations, and the magnitude of what once was becomes clear. Here, a people forged empires, wrote laws, made peace with pharaohs. And then, like a candle in a storm, they went out. What force could extinguish a world so completely? What truths lie buried beneath the dust of Hatusa? And how many more civilizations, once vibrant and proud, now sleep in silence, waiting for their story to be uncovered once more? As the winds leave behind the stony silence of Hatusa, we turn south, to the brilliant blue waters of the Aegean Sea. Here, sunlight dances on waves that hide ancient secrets below. Just north of Crete lies the island of Santorini, once called Thera, its whitewashed cliffs curving around a vast volcanic caldera. But this serene beauty belies a catastrophic past. Roughly 3,600 years ago, sometime around 1600 BC, Thera exploded with unimaginable force. It was one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in human history, a thunderous detonation that could be heard across the Mediterranean. Ash blackened the skies. Tsunamis raced outward in all directions. Entire coastlines were redefined in a matter of hours. On the island itself, the flourishing Bronze Age settlement of Akrotiri was buried beneath meters of volcanic debris, preserved like a frozen echo in time. Homes still stand, frescoes still adorn their walls, but the people are gone. The eruption was apocalyptic, but it was not the end of a single city. It may have marked the unraveling of an entire civilization. The Minoans. Centered on the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization had thrived for centuries before the eruption. Their cities were graceful, multi-storied, adorned with vibrant art and advanced engineering. At Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea, grand palaces rose with labyrinthine corridors and indoor plumbing, centuries ahead of their time. Their culture was deeply maritime, trading, exploring, weaving connections across the Aegean and beyond. But sometime after the Thera eruption, they began to vanish. The palaces were abandoned. The writing, known as Linear A, fell silent. Their influence across the seas waned. By around 1100 BC, the Minoan world was gone, absorbed or replaced by the rise of Mycenaean Greece. What happened? It's easy to look to Thera for the answer. The eruption would have sent shockwaves through the Minoan heartland, literally and figuratively. Ashfall could have ruined crops. Earthquakes might have destabilized their cities. And the tsunami triggered by the blast could have decimated coastal settlements and wiped out fleets. For a civilization so deeply tied to the sea, such a blow may have been irrecoverable. But the timeline is not entirely clear. Some Minoan sites show continued occupation after the eruption. Knossos, for example, remained active for decades, even centuries. So, if the eruption wasn't the immediate cause of their collapse, then what was? Some archaeologists suggest that the eruption was only the beginning, a destabilizing event that triggered deeper crises. Trade networks were interrupted, food supplies diminished, political structures may have fractured under the strain, civil unrest or power struggles could have followed, gradually weakening the Minoans from within. Others point to external forces. Around the same time, the Mycenaeans, mainland Greeks with a more militaristic culture, began expanding their influence. There's evidence that they took control of Minoan sites, perhaps even seizing Knossos. Was there an invasion? A slow cultural takeover? Or did the Minoans, already weakened, simply fall under the shadow of a rising power? Then, there's the deeper enigma, the one that lingers beneath the surface of facts and theories. How could such a refined, complex, and seemingly peaceful civilization dissolve so quietly? There are no records of a great war, no final inscription or lamentation. Their art, rich in nature and ritual, offers no sign of cultural anxiety, no forewarning of doom. Their script remains undeciphered. Their myths are unknown. We can only infer their values from the traces they left behind, images of dolphins, priestesses, bulls, and mountains. And yet, for all their beauty and sophistication, they left behind no voice. This silence has invited speculation. Some wonder if the Minoans left voluntarily, fleeing their crumbling world in ships, becoming seafarers who vanished into distant lands, leaving only fragments behind. Others ask if the Mycenaeans, or even more shadowy forces, erased Minoan identity to forge something new. And then there is the oldest theory of all, a legend whispered down through millennia. Plato spoke of Atlantis, an advanced island civilization, blessed with knowledge and power, that fell in a single day and night of catastrophe. Could the Minoans have been the seed of that myth, a real culture whose sudden collapse imprinted itself on the collective memory of the ancient world? There's no proof, only possibility. Still, the question remains. What do we make of a civilization that flourished for over 1,000 years, then receded from history without fanfare? Today, you can walk the ruins of Knossos. You can see the reconstructed frescoes, the prints of the lilies, the bull leapers, the saffron gatherers. You can run your hand along stone walls built in an age before iron, before Homer, before Greece was Greece. But you cannot ask the Minoans who they were, or why they left. They remain, like the buried city of Akrotiri, beautifully preserved and completely silent. Was it the ash that ended them, or something else, still hidden beneath the waves, or buried beneath centuries of forgetting? Sometimes, history leaves us not with answers, but with silence. And in that silence, a deeper question always lingers. What else have we lost, without even knowing it? As the smoke of Thera fades across the Aegean, we now cross an ocean and leap forward in time, to another great city, another vanished power. Beneath the highland skies of central Mexico, cradled in a broad valley ringed by volcanic peaks, the remnants of a once mighty metropolis stretch silently across the land. Broad avenues, stepped pyramids, and vast plazas lie in perfect alignment, monumental, mathematical, and strangely devoid of personal memory. This is Teotihuacan, the city where men became gods. Long before the rise of the Aztec Empire, before even the Maya reached their peak, Teotihuacan was the beating heart of Mesoamerica. By 400 AD, it was the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, home to perhaps 100,000 people, possibly more. Its ceremonial center was dominated by the massive Pyramid of the Sun, flanked by the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. A central roadway, the Avenue of the Dead, stretched more than 2 miles in a straight, deliberate line. And yet, for all its grandeur, we do not know who built it, nor do we know why they left. Unlike later cultures, the builders of Teotihuacan left behind no written history, no royal inscriptions, no personal names carved in stone. Even the name Teotihuacan comes from the Aztecs centuries later. It means the place where the gods were born. But who were the people who lived here? And why, after centuries of prosperity and expansion, did they walk away from it all? Archaeological evidence tells us that the city was meticulously planned. Its grid-like structure, uniform apartment compounds, and water management systems point to centralized governance, an organized society with clear authority. And yet, no individual rulers are depicted. Unlike the Maya, who glorified their kings in sculpture and glyph, Teotihuacan's art is impersonal, emphasizing gods, animals, and abstract symbols rather than human elites. Was this a society ruled by collective ideology rather than dynastic kingship? A theocracy? A military oligarchy? The absence of ego in their art has puzzled researchers for decades. At its peak, Teotihuacan was not only politically dominant, it was economically and culturally influential. Its obsidian workshops produced tools and weapons traded across Mesoamerica. Its architecture and iconography spread far beyond the valley, even influencing distant Maya cities like Tikal and Copan. But sometime around 550 AD, something changed. Signs of fire and destruction appear in key areas of the city, particularly in the ceremonial and administrative sectors. Buildings were burned, statues smashed, temples desecrated, and then the city began to empty. Not all at once. The outskirts remained occupied for some time, but the center, the heart of Teotihuacan, fell silent. What happened? Some scholars point to internal uprising. The destruction seems targeted, focused on symbols of power and authority. Perhaps a revolt from within, a rebellion by marginalized groups, or a civil breakdown after a succession crisis. Without names or written records, it's impossible to know who rose up or who fell. Others propose environmental stress. Droughts, climate fluctuations, or soil depletion could have undermined the city's food supply. Recent studies of lakebed sediments suggest periods of aridity during this era. Could ecological strain have pushed a tightly packed urban population past its limits? There are also signs of external pressure. Some researchers suspect warfare played a role, either from rival powers or migrating peoples. A shifting trade network may have undercut Teotihuacan's economic base, or perhaps other rising cultures, like those in the Gulf Coast or Oaxaca, challenged its authority and catalyzed its decline. But none of these explanations fully account for the scale or the symbolism of the destruction. Why burn the temples? Why erase the gods? And why abandon a city of such scale and importance rather than rebuild or resettle it? In the vacuum left behind, new powers emerged. The Toltecs, the Mixtecs, the Aztecs. Each one looked back toward Teotihuacan as a place of origin, a cradle of civilization, a sacred city built by giants or deities. The Aztecs, when they discovered its ruins, believed it was the birthplace of the fifth sun, the very beginning of time. Was this merely myth? Or did the memory of Teotihuacan survive in fragmented stories, passed down by those who once lived in its shadow? Some fringe theories go further. They point to the mathematical precision of its layout, its alignment with celestial bodies, its repeated use of sacred numbers and geometry. They ask whether the builders possessed astronomical knowledge still not fully understood. Others speculate about unknown migrations, lost cultures, even contacts with distant civilizations. But the evidence remains inconclusive, the answers always just out of reach. What remains is the city itself. Teotihuacan still stands. Its pyramids rise against the sky. Its murals, though faded, still pulse with color, depicting jaguars, serpents, and abstract deities whose names we'll never know. Walk the Avenue of the Dead, and you walk a path once trodden by tens of thousands, a people who built a world from stone and silence, and then chose to leave it behind. We do not know what they feared. We do not know what they hoped. Was Teotihuacan destroyed in violence, or quietly surrendered to time? Was it the end of a civilization, or the beginning of a story we have yet to understand? Even now, beneath the soil, new chambers are being discovered. Long-sealed tunnels, hidden offerings, untouched tombs, whispers of a people who vanished, without a final word. And so the question remains: what was Teotihuacan? And why did its people walk away from the city where gods were once born? And as the ancient stones of Teotihuacan fade into the mists of time, we shift our gaze toward a very different stage, a palace bathed in heat and opulence, standing along the banks of the Euphrates River. The year is 323 BC. The place is Babylon. Within its gilded halls, under vaulted ceilings and flickering oil lamps, the most powerful man in the known world lies motionless. Feverish, weak, surrounded by generals, physicians, and priests, yet beyond the reach of all of them. His name was Alexander, and his death would echo louder than any of his victories. He had conquered from Greece to Egypt, from the Levant to the edge of India. Undefeated in battle, revered by his troops, feared by his enemies. He had toppled the Persian Empire, spread Hellenistic culture across 3 continents, and dreamed of uniting East and West into a single, vast civilization. But at the height of his power, just shy of his 33rd birthday, he fell ill. It began with a sudden fever, then chills, pain. Over the course of 12 days, his condition worsened. His speech slowed, his limbs failed. By the end, he could no longer move or speak. And then, he was gone. No wound, no clear disease, no obvious enemy. How could a man of such vigor and strength, celebrated as semi-divine, as a living god by some, die so abruptly and so young? Ancient historians tried to answer this question, but their accounts vary. Some suggest that Alexander succumbed to a sudden illness, perhaps typhoid fever, malaria, or a parasitic infection picked up during his long campaigns. Others mention complications from past injuries, excessive drinking, or emotional stress. In an age without modern medicine, any of these might have been fatal. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because the circumstances surrounding his death raise deeper questions. According to several sources, Alexander's body showed no sign of decay for days after his passing. In the ancient world, such a phenomenon was seen as a divine sign, an indication of godhood. But to modern minds, it adds another layer of mystery. Was he truly dead? Or had he slipped into a deep coma, mistaken for death in a time without advanced diagnostics? If so, was he buried alive? Others have asked whether his death was natural at all. His inner circle, known as the Diadochi, were ambitious, powerful men. They knew that Alexander had not named a clear successor. With no legitimate heir to the empire, a vacuum would follow, and with it, opportunity. Was it coincidence that Alexander's final illness came after a lavish banquet? That it progressed rapidly, with symptoms described by some as consistent with poison? And if so, who would have had the motive? Some theories point to Antipater, a powerful regent in Macedonia, whose son Cassander would later become king. Others speculate about generals like Ptolemy or Seleucus, men who carved empires out of Alexander's legacy. Even Aristotle, Alexander's former tutor, was rumored in ancient times to have been involved. Yet, if it was poison, it must have been a rare and slow-acting kind. Ancient poisons typically acted quickly. To stretch symptoms over 12 days would have required advanced knowledge, perhaps even a substance now lost to time. Then, there is the mystery of his burial. After his death, Alexander's body was placed in a golden sarcophagus, then a gold casket, and transported out of Babylon. But where it ended up is still unknown. Initially, it was meant to be sent back to Macedonia, to his mother Olympias. But Ptolemy intercepted the funeral procession and brought the body to Egypt, where Alexander had declared himself son of Zeus Ammon and founded the city that bore his name. There, in Alexandria, the tomb became a place of pilgrimage. Roman emperors visited it. Julius Caesar wept at its side. Augustus laid flowers upon it. But sometime in late antiquity, it vanished. Earthquakes, religious upheaval, and time itself may have buried it beneath the shifting streets of the modern city. Despite numerous excavations, the tomb of Alexander the Great remains lost. Could it still be hidden, somewhere under Alexandria's dense and chaotic sprawl? Could the body that inspired legends, united nations, and changed the course of history still lie undisturbed? Or was it destroyed, forgotten, erased intentionally? The death of Alexander did more than end a life. It shattered a world. His empire, so recently forged, fractured within days. Generals became kings. Wars erupted. His wife and son were murdered. His dream of a united empire became a battleground. And yet, the man himself, the how, the where, and the why of his final moments, remains a blank space in the center of a map he once controlled. Was his death simply the tragic end of a brilliant, overstrained life? Or something darker, carefully orchestrated, expertly concealed? Even now, over 2 millennia later, we can only trace shadows through the accounts of ancient historians, many writing long after his passing, shaped by rumor, politics, and myth. What truths have been lost between the lines? And what secrets might still lie beneath the streets of Alexandria, waiting to be unearthed? In the end, perhaps the greatest mystery of Alexander's life is how little we truly understand about its final chapter. A chapter that closed too quickly and left the world forever changed. And as the echo of Alexander's final breath fades into silence, we step backward again, into an age even more shadowed, more elusive. A time when great cities fell one after another, as if struck by a hidden hand. Fires swept across palaces, trade routes vanished, languages disappeared. Across the eastern Mediterranean, entire civilizations seemed to collapse in unison. And somewhere behind it all came the Sea Peoples. We do not know who they were. We do not know where they came from, and we do not know what became of them. But for a brief and cataclysmic moment, in the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC, they changed the course of history. The evidence is scattered, yet haunting. Inscriptions from Egypt, stone reliefs, and ruined settlements offer glimpses, fragments of a larger, unresolved puzzle. The most famous account comes from the mortuary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu. There, chiseled into stone, is a dramatic scene. Rows of ships locked in battle, warriors in horned helmets leaping ashore, chariots crashing, fire consuming cities. The pharaoh boasts of victory. Those who came on the sea, their seed is not. Their hearts and their souls are finished forever. But the relief tells only one side of the story. What led these mysterious invaders to strike? And why did their arrival coincide with the sudden collapse of nearly every major Bronze Age power? Hatti, Ugarit, Mycenae, Alatia. Each of them fell within decades, many without record, without resistance, without return. Trade links that had spanned hundreds of miles simply vanished. Writing systems stopped being used. The rhythm of civilization was broken. The sea peoples are blamed. But who were they? The term itself, sea peoples, is a modern label derived from Egyptian records that grouped several foreign tribes together: the Shurdan, the Shekelesh, the Peliset, the Luka, and others. Their names appear, but their origins remain uncertain. Were they migrants, mercenaries, displaced farmers driven by famine or drought? Or were they warriors, opportunists exploiting chaos for conquest? Some scholars believe they came from the Aegean world, perhaps from collapsing Mycenaean kingdoms. Others point toward western Anatolia, or even further afield, Sardinia, Sicily, the Balkans. If so, what compelled these seafaring groups to abandon their homes and sweep across the Mediterranean like a storm? Environmental data provides a clue. Drought records from this period suggest a prolonged climate shift, a drying of lands once fertile. Combined with earthquakes and overpopulation, this may have created the perfect conditions for mass migration. Starving populations might have moved southward in desperate search of food and security. But the scale of destruction seems too vast for hunger alone. The cities of Ugarit and Alalak, once vibrant coastal hubs, were reduced to ash. Their clay tablets tell of urgent pleas for aid, letters sent but never answered. In the Hittite heartland, administrative centers were burned, palaces abandoned. Even the mighty Mycenaeans, whose fortress cities once dominated Greece, fell into ruin. Writing, Linear B, was lost for centuries. Was this a domino effect? Did one civilization's fall destabilize the next, like a chain of fire in dry grass? Or was there something more deliberate behind it? Some theorists propose a coordinated confederation of tribes, a multi-ethnic alliance of dispossessed peoples, moving together with ships and weapons, reshaping the map through sheer force. Others question whether the sea peoples were truly invaders at all. Could they have been the final symptom of a deeper crisis? Refugees rather than aggressors. And then there are the more speculative ideas that the sea peoples were remnants of forgotten cultures, maritime societies that operated on the fringes of the known world, that their knowledge of shipbuilding and coastal warfare gave them a temporary edge over the land-based powers of the Bronze Age, or even that they carried ideologies and technologies foreign to the lands they invaded, revolutionary in ways that disrupted traditional hierarchies. We do not know, because the sea peoples, like the cities they helped destroy, left almost nothing behind. No texts, no monuments, no known descendants who claimed their name. Only the records of others, often their enemies, remain. And even those are few, sometimes ambiguous, and shaped by political rhetoric. In the chaos of the time, fact and myth blur. Ramses III may have repelled them in Egypt, but even that kingdom suffered deep wounds. The centralized administration weakened. Grain shortages followed. Egypt would never fully recover its former reach. Elsewhere, what followed the sea peoples was not conquest, but silence. A dark age. The Iron Age would emerge slowly from this void, bringing new languages, new powers. But the great cultures of the Bronze Age, those that once spoke with one another across seas, that sent ambassadors, exchanged gifts, signed treaties, were gone. All because of a people we cannot name with certainty. Were the sea peoples a cause of collapse, or a consequence? Did they trigger the end, or simply arrive at its final hour, like scavengers after a storm? Even now, archaeologists continue to uncover new clues. Weapons caches buried beneath ruined walls, mass graves, shipwrecks, stone inscriptions. But the core mystery remains intact, resistant to time, uncooperative with certainty. Who were they? And what would it mean if their story, still untold, was a mirror of our own fragility? Civilization, after all, is a delicate thing. And sometimes all it takes is a ripple from the sea. The memory of the sea peoples drifts like smoke across a blackened shoreline, but their story is just one thread in a much wider unraveling. Across the eastern Mediterranean, from the Greek mainland to the hills of Canaan, from the Hittite heartland of Anatolia to the delta of the Nile, the ancient world was crumbling. Not in a single day, or in one fateful year, but over the course of a single, turbulent century. Between 1200 and 1100 BC, the civilizations that had defined the Bronze Age fell one after another, like stars extinguished in a night sky. It is one of the greatest collapses in human history, and to this day, no one fully understands why. Imagine walking through the ruins of Mycenae, once a fortified citadel of kings, now silent stone walls overgrown with dry grass. Picture Ugarit, a thriving port city on the Syrian coast, its last letters buried in a layer of ash. Hear the echoes in the shattered temples of Hatusa, the royal libraries of Alalak, the broken palaces of Cyprus and Crete. Across the region, cities burned, languages vanished, trade routes disappeared, writing systems were forgotten. And then came the silence. The Bronze Age had been a time of connection. It was an age of diplomacy and exchange, of fragile but far-reaching stability. The kingdoms of the Near East corresponded with each other through carefully scripted letters, cuneiform tablets bearing messages of alliance, marriage, and trade. Copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, cedar from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Ships carried goods and ideas across the sea. Scribes recorded them. Armies defended them. Gods were invoked to protect them. But this interconnected world was also vulnerable. What happens when the foundation cracks? Mainstream historians offer a series of plausible explanations, none of them complete on their own. One is climate change. Droughts, confirmed by pollen samples and sediment data, may have reduced agricultural output across the region. Without food, even the greatest cities could not survive. Another factor is seismic activity. Earthquakes were common in the Aegean and Anatolia. A chain of natural disasters, floods, quakes, crop failures, could have thrown entire systems into chaos. There is also the collapse of trade itself. The economies of the late Bronze Age were deeply interconnected. If one region faltered, say, if tin shipments ceased or grain supplies ran dry, it could trigger a cascade of disruptions. A city-state dependent on foreign imports might be forced to raid its neighbors, or fall to famine. Internal unrest, too, seems likely. Evidence suggests that some palace centers were destroyed not from the outside, but from within. Perhaps local populations revolted against the elite systems that had dominated for centuries. Displaced peoples, disillusioned soldiers, or starving farmers may have taken up arms against those in power. And then there are the migrations. The movement of people on a massive scale, displaced, desperate, and armed, could have further destabilized the region. The so-called Sea Peoples may have been part of this, but they were likely only one facet of a broader wave of instability. Still, the question lingers. Why did everything fall? Why not just one empire or one city-state, but almost all of them? Hatti, Mycenae, Ugarit, Alashia, the Kassites in Babylon, the Mitanni. Even Egypt, though it survived, never truly recovered. For centuries afterward, the region entered a period of decline. Literacy waned, monumental architecture ceased, cities shrank or disappeared. The complex world of the Bronze Age gave way to a more fragmented, localized landscape. Some scholars suggest we think of it not as a singular collapse, but as a systems failure, an intricate web of political, economic, social, and environmental stressors, all pulling at each other until the entire structure fell apart. A civilization too complex to adapt. But others see shadows beyond the data. there are whispers of long-forgotten technologies, of knowledge lost with the palaces that held it. Some have speculated that key metallurgical techniques, advanced shipbuilding methods, or early scientific understandings may have vanished in the fires, that the sudden retreat from bronze and the rise of iron tools was not an innovation, but a necessity, a step backward from a knowledge that was lost. And then there are those who ask if we're missing the central cause altogether, that the clues lie in gaps too wide to bridge with pottery shards or inscriptions, that something remains buried beneath ash and time, an unknown factor that has yet to be uncovered. Whatever the truth, the aftermath was profound. In the centuries following the collapse, new cultures began to rise. The Phoenicians, the Israelites, the early Greeks. They built atop the ruins, inherited fragments of the old world, and carried forward new ideas. But the great powers of the late Bronze Age, those who traded with each other as equals, who saw the world as one vast, shared system, never returned. The collapse reshaped history. It ended one world and began another. But the transition remains mysterious. Was it a convergence of natural disasters? A revolution of the poor? A chain reaction sparked by unseen hands? Or something else? Something we've yet to understand? Even now, archaeologists and historians piece together the puzzle. New excavations, advances in climate science, and comparative studies continue to shed light. But the full picture remains elusive. A global system broke. A golden age ended. And in its place, silence, ruins, and questions that have lasted for more than 3,000 years. What, we must wonder, could cause our own world to stumble in such a way? And would we even recognize it before it was too late? And as the dust of the Bronze Age settles over the fractured empires and forgotten cities, we move toward one of the most enduring and debated mysteries of the ancient world. Not a collapsed palace or a vanished tomb, but a story. A story written in fire and fear, in freedom and divine wrath. A story told across millennia, but never fully proven. The Exodus. It begins in Egypt, the land of the Nile, of granite temples and sun gods, of precision and permanence. For centuries, pharaohs ruled this kingdom with near-divine authority. And yet, within the pages of the Hebrew Bible, a very different image emerges. A people enslaved, a ruler hardened, and a series of plagues so devastating they brought the most powerful empire in the world to its knees. The narrative is gripping. A Hebrew child, raised in the palace, flees into exile, only to return as the chosen voice of a god. A prophet who demands freedom for his people. A pharaoh who refuses. Rivers run with blood. Darkness covers the land. The firstborn die. And in the chaos that follows, the Israelites flee, walking out of bondage under cover of night, crossing the wilderness toward a promised land. But where does history end and myth begin? Despite its cultural and religious significance, the Exodus remains one of the most enigmatic events in the ancient record. No Egyptian texts mention the plagues. No royal archives describe the escape of a massive labor force. No monuments mourn the drowning of an army in the sea. And yet, echoes linger. Some scholars suggest that if the Exodus occurred, it must have left behind some trace, something quieter, subtler than scripture. Could it be found in the sudden shifts in population along the Nile Delta? Or in the mysterious expulsion of the Hixos, a Semitic people who ruled parts of Egypt for nearly a century before being forced out around 1550 BC? The parallels are tempting. Like the Israelites, the Hyksos were foreigners. Like the Israelites, they departed in large numbers under pressure. But the Hyksos were rulers, not slaves. Their departure was military defeat, not divine deliverance. Still, for some, the memory of their fall may have influenced later oral traditions, distorted by time, into something more symbolic, more moral. Others look to the natural world for answers. Could the plagues have been real, but caused by environmental disaster? A red tide turning the Nile blood-like? Frogs fleeing the dying riverbanks? Insects, disease, darkness, all plausible in a region prone to both drought and flood. Volcanic eruptions, like the massive Thera eruption around 1600 BC, may have created atmospheric conditions that align eerily with the biblical account. And then there's the question of the sea. The Bible speaks of parted waters, of walls of ocean held back by wind, of a path through chaos. A miracle. But scholars have long debated what body of water this might refer to. The Red Sea? The smaller, marshy Reed Sea? Some even suggest tidal phenomena or seismic activity could have briefly exposed a crossing point, only to flood it again, swallowing the pursuing army. Could a natural event be the root of a supernatural story? Still, the heart of the mystery is not the science, but the silence. Why does Egyptian history, so careful in its record-keeping, say nothing of such a dramatic event? Some argue it was intentional, that the Egyptians would never preserve a tale of divine defeat. That shame, not oversight, buried the event. Others suggest the Israelites at the time were too few, too insignificant to appear in state records, or that the story of the Exodus is not one single historical moment, but a woven memory, a collective echo of multiple migrations, exiles, and returns. We do know that a people called Israel appear in Egyptian records as early as the 13th century BC. The Merneptah stele, dated around 1208 BC, names Israel as a people, already present in Canaan. Not a city, not a kingdom, but a distinct group. By then, the Exodus, if historical, must have already occurred. But if so, where are the footprints? The Sinai desert is vast, harsh, reluctant to preserve what isn't carved in stone. Archaeological evidence for a mass migration of hundreds of thousands has not been found. No campsites, no inscriptions, no discarded tools. Could it be that the journey was smaller, slower? That the numbers in the biblical text are symbolic, not statistical? The debate continues among theologians, archaeologists, historians. Some see the Exodus as pure myth, a tale crafted for spiritual identity. Others see it as a memory, obscured by time, but rooted in real events. Still others suggest that the question itself may be flawed, that truth and tradition are not always at odds, that history is not only what is written in stone, but also what is remembered in story. And in the end, the Exodus remains a threshold between the known and the unknowable, a journey half remembered, half revealed, a people walking out of bondage into legend. Was it a historical exodus, a metaphor for spiritual transformation, or both? And what might still lie beneath the shifting sands of Egypt and Sinai, waiting to whisper a truth the desert has long concealed? As the dust of the Exodus settles into sacred memory, we return to the crumbling thresholds of the Aegean, where another ancient world unraveled, quietly and completely. Beneath the sun-bleached hills of mainland Greece, scattered among olive groves and stony ridges, lie the ruins of once mighty fortresses. Towering walls of massive stones, so immense the ancients said only giants could have placed them, still stand at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. Cyclopean walls, they're called, and behind them once lived the kings of the Mycenaean world, the rulers who, in later Greek tradition, became legends: Agamemnon, Nestor, Menelaus. And yet, sometime around 1200 BC, this civilization collapsed, not in myth, but in silence. The palaces were abandoned. The administrative centers ceased to function. The richly decorated tombs no longer held kings, only dust. Linear B, The script they used for record-keeping vanished, along with the bureaucratic order it upheld. Writing itself disappeared from Greece for nearly 400 years. Why? The Mycenaeans had flourished for centuries, dominating the Aegean after the decline of the Minoans. Their citadels were more than military strongholds. They were centers of production, trade, and religious ritual. They imported tin and gold, exported olive oil and pottery, maintained long-distance connections across the Mediterranean. They were not isolated. They were part of the late Bronze Age network, tied to Egypt, to Hatti, to Canaan. And like so many of those great powers, they fell. The signs of decline are unmistakable. Around 1190 BC, the palace of Pylos was destroyed by fire. Mycenae too suffered destruction, its grand megaron, the central hall of its ruler, reduced to rubble. Other sites were abandoned altogether or slowly depopulated. The pottery styles changed. The architecture grew simpler. The economic system fractured. And the script, the meticulous accounting of the palace economy, with its tallies of livestock and grain, disappeared. Greece entered what historians call the Greek Dark Age. So what happened? There is no single answer. Instead, there is a cluster of possibilities, each one a piece of a puzzle with too many missing corners. One theory points to warfare. There is archaeological evidence of conflict, burn layers, weapons, hastily built walls. Some citadels may have fought each other. Others may have faced external threats. Could the Sea Peoples have reached the Greek mainland? If so, did they invade? Or were the Mycenaeans themselves part of this great maritime movement? Another theory looks inward. The Mycenaean economy was highly centralized. Palace elites controlled the distribution of goods, labor, and resources. If that system faltered, through drought, crop failure, or famine, then society itself might have fractured. Local communities may have risen against the ruling class, leading to political fragmentation. Environmental factors also loom large. Studies of pollen samples and lake sediments in the eastern Mediterranean suggest a shift toward a drier climate in this period. Prolonged droughts may have crippled agriculture. Earthquakes, common in this seismically active region, could have caused widespread devastation. A quake strong enough to level a palace would have been more than a natural disaster. It would have disrupted the entire social structure built around it. Still others look to the possibility of disease. Could a plague, moving along trade routes, have struck the population, weakened the workforce, and eroded confidence in the ruling elite? There is no direct evidence, but the possibility remains. And then there are the more speculative voices. Some suggest the Mycenaeans may have pushed too far, expanded too ambitiously, fought too many wars, drained their own strength. Others wonder about lost migrations, unknown invaders, or even forgotten technologies that once gave them dominance but could not be sustained. A few have tried to tie the decline to astronomical events, solar flares, comets, or celestial omens that destabilized belief systems. But the evidence resists simple answers. Because the Mycenaean collapse was not a single event, it was a slow unraveling, spread across decades, uneven and complex. Some regions fell into ruin quickly, others lingered for generations. In some places, life went on, simpler, poorer, more localized. In others, the silence was total. And curiously, the memory of this world survived, but only through myth. Centuries later, Greek poets would sing of golden ages, of great kings and heroic wars. The tales of Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, may preserve distant echoes of the Mycenaean world. The palaces of Troy and Mycenae, the ships of Achaean warriors, the names of heroes. Was the Trojan War itself a distorted memory of this very collapse? A final act before the curtain fell? We may never know. What we do know is this: a sophisticated, literate, far-reaching civilization, builders of fortresses, organizers of armies, engineers of roads and drainage systems, disappeared. And from its ruins, centuries later, rose a different Greece. The Greece of city-states, of philosophers, of democracy and drama. But before that came the darkness. Why did the Mycenaeans fall? What did they leave behind that we have yet to find? And how many of our own foundations rest on stories that were once stone? In the hills of Greece, the cicadas still sing over broken walls, and somewhere beneath the soil, the last words of the Mycenaeans may still be waiting. Patient, undeciphered, unseen. As the echoes of Mycenaean kings fade into myth and memory, we return to the Near East, where another silence, more spiritual than material, continues to puzzle historians, theologians, and seekers alike. A disappearance not of monuments, but of people. A scattering. A vanishing act carried out not in the shadows, but recorded in plain sight. This is the mystery of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. It begins in the northern highlands of ancient Canaan, among olive trees and terraced hillsides, where a kingdom once thrived. The kingdom of Israel, separate from its southern neighbor, Judah, was home to 10 of the original 12 tribes said to descend from the sons of Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and Manasseh. They built cities, worshipped in sanctuaries at Dan and Bethel, raised flocks, and cultivated vineyards. Prophets warned of judgment. Kings ruled in succession. And then, in the 8th century BC, everything changed. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire swept through the region. Powerful, efficient, and brutal, the Assyrians captured the capital city of Samaria after a prolonged siege. According to both biblical records and Assyrian annals, the northern kingdom was crushed. Its elites were exiled, its people deported, the land repopulated with foreign settlers, and the 10 tribes of Israel vanished from history. The Assyrian strategy was clear: relocate conquered peoples to prevent rebellion and dissolve cultural identity. And so, the Israelites were said to have been carried away to regions beyond the Euphrates, Hala, Habor, and the cities of the Medes. Beyond this, however, no definitive trace remains. No returning caravans, no known descendants, no ancient letters reaching home. What became of them? The Bible itself offers little closure. Later books, such as 2nd Esdras, speak of the tribes wandering to a distant land where never mankind dwelt, a poetic image, perhaps, of spiritual exile. Jewish tradition, over centuries, speculated that they lived beyond some river, hidden until a messianic return. But history leaves only footprints, and here the ground is dry. Some scholars argue the answer may be simpler than the myth suggests, that the deported tribes were absorbed into the cultures they were exiled to, intermarried, assimilated, forgotten. In this view, the disappearance is not so much a vanishing as a dilution, a fading away of distinct tribal identity under the weight of empire and time. But others are not so sure. From the Middle Ages to modern times, countless groups have claimed, or have been claimed, as the descendants of the lost tribes. The Beta Israel of Ethiopia, who practiced a form of Judaism for centuries before outside contact, were once thought by some to descend from the tribe of Dan. The Bene Israel of India, the Pashtun tribes of Afghanistan, and even communities in Japan and Native American nations have all, at one point, been linked to the ancient Israelites through language patterns, customs, or ancient oral traditions. In the 19th and 20th centuries, British Israelism emerged, a belief that the Anglo-Saxon peoples were the true heirs of the 10 tribes. Though widely discredited by scholars, it illustrates the enduring fascination with the idea that an entire part of biblical identity might live on, hidden in plain sight. But with every theory comes a problem. Proof. No inscriptions. No DNA evidence confirmed beyond doubt. No ancient documents unearthed with the names of the lost tribes in foreign lands. The trail grows cold quickly, leaving only shadows and speculation. Still, the notion of the 10 lost tribes has proven more than a historical curiosity. It's become a symbol, a mystery that blends faith and longing. For many Jewish communities, the idea is deeply spiritual. The belief that the tribes are not lost forever, but hidden by design, to one day be gathered again. For others, the idea becomes a story of survival, of identity displaced but never destroyed. Modern historians continue to investigate the fall of the Northern Kingdom. Some propose that not all 10 tribes were exiled. Some may have fled south to Judah and integrated into the population there. Others may have remained in the land, adapting quietly under foreign rule. The binary of lost versus preserved may oversimplify a more gradual and fragmented transformation. And yet, the silence remains. A whole branch of biblical lineage, spoken of in Scripture, vanishes from the archaeological and historical record almost completely. No tombs, no settlements, no firm trail. Just the lingering question, where did they go? Were they scattered to the winds, swallowed by the great machine of empire, or did they seed something new, identities reborn in places we have yet to recognize? Or is the very idea of the 10 lost tribes less about history and more about hope? A yearning for unity, a belief that what was scattered can one day be gathered. The hills of Samaria still rise above the valleys of the ancient kingdom. Olive trees still cling to the rocky soil, but the voices that once named their tribes are gone. And the question remains, are the 10 tribes truly lost, or simply waiting to be found? And from the vanished tribes of Israel, scattered across unknown lands, we follow the faint trail of lost knowledge to the Mediterranean coast of Egypt, to a gleaming city built by Alexander the Great himself, a place envisioned as the new crossroads of the ancient world. Alexandria. Here, where the Nile meets the sea, once stood one of humanity's greatest achievements, not a palace nor a temple, but a library, a sanctuary of scrolls, a monument not to power or conquest, but to curiosity. The Library of Alexandria. Imagine it, colonnaded halls of marble, sunlight slanting through lattice windows, scribes moving silently between shelves of papyrus and parchment. The air thick with the scent of ink and sea salt. Here, thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of texts from across the known world were gathered. Mathematics, astronomy, history, medicine, poetry, philosophy. The works of Egyptians, Babylonians, Greeks, Indians, Persians, and more. It was more than a library. It was an attempt to preserve and centralize the totality of human knowledge, a universal memory, a beacon. And then, at some point, it was gone. Its shelves turned to ash, its knowledge lost to time, and no one can say for certain how or when. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria is often spoken of as a singular, catastrophic event, a fire, a battle, a villain. But the truth is far more elusive. Was it one act of destruction, or many, spread across centuries? Some point to Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, during a civil war in Egypt, Caesar found himself besieged in Alexandria. To secure his position, he ordered the burning of the Egyptian fleet in the harbor. The flames reportedly spread into the city, and may have reached the library or one of its affiliated storage centers. If so, this would have been the first blow, not a final one. But others suggest the main library had already declined by then, and that Caesar's fire struck only part of the collection. Later, Roman historians disagree on how much was lost. Some say it was minor. Others claim tens of thousands of scrolls were consumed. Then there's the account of Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria, and the destruction of pagan temples under Christian rule in the late 4th century AD. In this version, the library, or what remained of it, was deemed heretical, associated with ancient gods and forbidden texts. One such location was the Serapeum, a temple to Serapis that housed scrolls in its own annex. It was destroyed under imperial orders, and whatever knowledge remained may have perished with it. A century later, the Muslim conquest of Egypt brought new rulers to Alexandria. In the 7th century, an anecdote, possibly apocryphal, claims that Caliph Umar, when asked what to do with the library's books, replied, "If what they contain agrees with the Quran, they are superfluous. If they disagree, they are heretical." And so, the story goes, the books were burned. But this account appears centuries after the fact. Most modern historians doubt its authenticity. It may reflect more about later cultural tensions than actual events. So what truly happened? Perhaps there was no grand burning, no single moment of cultural amnesia. Perhaps it was a slow erosion, centuries of neglect, political instability, religious upheaval, and shifting priorities. One ruler after another, one war after another, until finally the shelves stood empty. But if that's the case, what exactly was lost? That too is a mystery. No catalog of the library has survived. We don't know how many scrolls were kept, or how many were original. Some ancient estimates speak of 400,000 works, others 700,000. But these may be exaggerations. We do know that the library employed scholars from across the known world, that it sponsored translations, debates, and original research, that it preserved works that have otherwise vanished. Imagine what may have been inside. Lost plays of Euripides, unknown dialogues of Plato, the complete works of Aristotle, Babylonian star charts, Egyptian medical treatises, Indian mathematical texts centuries ahead of their time, perhaps even histories of now forgotten civilizations. Some speculate the library may have held records of Atlantis, or even earlier mythical histories, if such things ever existed. Others believe that advanced understandings of the human body, or the cosmos, were wiped away with the scrolls. We cannot know. All we have are fragments, quotes in later works, references in letters, glimpses through secondary sources, a line here, a title there, echoes. And so, the Library of Alexandria becomes more than a place. It becomes a symbol of what we once knew and what we've forgotten, of what it means to gather knowledge, and how easily it can be lost. Was its destruction the result of war, ideology, neglect, or something more deliberate? Was it burned to erase dangerous knowledge, or simply lost in the chaos of empire? And if a collection like this could disappear once, could it again? Today, as we rebuild digital libraries and preserve information in the cloud, the fate of Alexandria reminds us how fragile knowledge can be. That even the brightest flame of wisdom can be snuffed out, not with a single fire, but with a long, quiet fading. Somewhere beneath the modern streets of Alexandria, perhaps, a scroll still lies buried in the earth, unread, waiting, and we are left to wonder, what truths once rested between those vanished pages, and how much of our own future depends on what we choose to preserve? And from the ashes of Alexandria's lost scrolls, we turn now to a much older silence. A silence carved in stone, hidden beneath the dense green canopy of the Mexican tropics, where the ruins of the first great Mesoamerican civilization lie half buried and half understood. This is the world of the Olmecs. On the humid Gulf Coast of what is now Veracruz and Tabasco, colossal stone heads rise from the jungle floor. Each weighs several tons, carved with astonishing precision from volcanic basalt. their faces stern and enigmatic. Their purpose remains unknown. Their makers, long vanished. The Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, flourished between roughly 1600 and 400 BC. They predate the Maya. They predate the Aztecs. And yet, they left behind symbols, structures, and systems that would echo through the centuries: writing, urban planning, pyramids, sacred ball games, and complex calendars. They were the first to shape the religious and cultural landscape of ancient Mexico. But sometime after 400 BC, they disappeared. There was no known invasion, no record of war, no great fire, no final inscription. The monumental cities of San Lorenzo, La Venta, and Tres Zapotes were slowly abandoned. The sculptures left behind. The jungles reclaimed them. What happened? At their height, the Olmecs demonstrated remarkable sophistication. San Lorenzo, one of their earliest cities, was built on a massive artificial plateau, an engineering feat rarely credited to such an early civilization. They redirected rivers, constructed drainage systems, and organized large labor forces. Later, at La Venta, they built pyramid-like mounds aligned with celestial bodies. They carved not just heads, but thrones, stelae, and symbolic altars, often with recurring motifs of jaguars, serpents, and deities that suggest a rich, complex cosmology. Their art is enigmatic. Baby-faced figurines, creatures with human and animal features, symbols that may have been the earliest writing system in the Americas. Some glyphs hint at phonetic sounds, perhaps even names or stories. But no Rosetta Stone has been found. Their language, if it survives at all, remains undeciphered. And then, just as their influence seemed poised to expand, it ended. Scholars have proposed several explanations. One is environmental. The Olmec heartland is shaped by rivers, swamps, and seasonal floods. Some theorize that a major ecological shift, perhaps a change in river flow or extreme flooding, could have rendered their urban centers uninhabitable. Others suggest resource depletion. As populations grew, demands on local forests, soils, and water sources may have outpaced what the land could provide. The result: gradual collapse, emigration, and dispersal. There's also the possibility of internal upheaval. Social unrest, power struggles, or religious crises could have fractured the ruling elite. In La Venta, some monuments were intentionally defaced before abandonment, as if rejected by those who once revered them. Was this iconoclasm, a revolution, a rejection of the old order? Still others point outward. Did neighboring cultures rise and absorb the Olmec world? Archaeological evidence suggests that as Olmec centers declined, other regions, such as the Valley of Oaxaca and the Maya lowlands, began to flourish. Trade may have shifted, influence may have dispersed. The Olmecs, once dominant, might have faded into the cultures they helped shape. But the Olmec disappearance leaves more questions than answers, because unlike the Maya or the Aztecs, the Olmecs left no historical records, no king lists, no chronicles of battle or famine. Their monuments are silent. Their cities do not tell us why they were left behind. And then there are the more speculative ideas. Some have noted the apparent suddenness of their decline and questioned whether we're missing something fundamental. Were the Olmecs victims of an unknown disease, a plague that left no trace? Or could a cosmic event, an earthquake, a meteorite, a climatic catastrophe, have played a role? Fringe theories, though not widely accepted, ask if the Olmecs had contact with distant peoples, from Africa, from the Pacific, even from across the ocean. These theories often point to the colossal heads, whose facial features have inspired endless debate. But no hard evidence supports such claims, and the true identity of the individuals they depict remains unknown. Are they rulers, ancestors, gods, or something else entirely. Today, Olmec influence is visible across ancient Mesoamerica, woven into the cultural DNA of later civilizations. Their iconography, beliefs, and city structures echo in the ruins of Monte Alban, Tikal, and Teotihuacan. But the Olmecs themselves remain a ghostly presence, pioneers of complexity, swallowed by time. Their civilization rose in obscurity, thrived in splendor, and vanished into the jungle without a word. How does a society capable of carving such monumental artistry, of reshaping rivers and building celestial temples, simply dissolve? Were they forgotten? Or did they choose to leave no trace? Are their descendants still among us, culturally transformed, linguistically unrecognizable? Or does the real answer lie beneath the soil of Veracruz and Tabasco, waiting for the next excavation to whisper its truth? The stone heads remain, immovable, watchful, silent. And the question lingers. What did the Olmecs know? And why did their voices fall quiet in the forest? From the misty jungles of ancient Mesoamerica, where the Olmecs left their last stone-faced enigmas, we return now to the shifting sands of the Near East, to the heart of a world once ruled with fire, iron, and fear. Nineveh, a name carved into the bones of history, the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, at its height, the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. Towering walls surrounded the city, rising more than 30 meters high and stretching for miles. Inside, palaces gleamed with alabaster reliefs. Kings spoke with the voice of gods. Armies moved across the land like thunder, swift, disciplined, and ruthless. From the mountains of Anatolia to the deserts of Egypt, few dared defy Assyria. And yet, by 609 BC, it was gone. Not slowly faded, like so many other empires, but violently, shockingly, and, some would say, suddenly. What could bring such a titan to its knees? At its peak, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was a model of organization and intimidation. Its rulers, Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Ashurbanipal, perfected the machinery of imperial control. They built roads and postal systems, established standing armies, and used psychological warfare with chilling efficiency. They exiled populations, imposed tributes, and erected monuments boasting of victory and vengeance. But beneath the surface of that power, something was shifting. The death of Ashurbanipal around 627 BC marked the beginning of a sharp and irreversible decline. He had been one of Assyria's most ambitious kings, cultured and cruel in equal measure. Under his rule, the empire reached its maximum extent. He created the famed library of Ashurbanipal, amassing thousands of tablets, literature, omens, histories, preserving knowledge from Sumer, Akkad, and Babylonia. And yet, within just 2 decades of his death, the empire shattered. How? Historians cite several factors. Internal strife was one. The succession after Ashurbanipal was unclear. Civil wars erupted. Generals turned against each other. Regional governors grew bolder, defying the crown. Administrative systems buckled under the weight of competing loyalties. But that's only part of the story. Externally, Assyria's enemies, long suppressed, began to close in. The Babylonians, led by Nabopolassar, rose in revolt. The Medes, a tribal confederation from the Iranian plateau, allied with them. The Scythians, fierce nomadic warriors from the steppes, launched their own incursions. One by one, Assyria's great cities fell. By 612 BC, even Nineveh, Assyria's proud capital, was under siege. The Babylonian Chronicle records its destruction with stark finality. The walls were breached. The palace was set ablaze. The city was plundered, its treasures looted, its survivors slaughtered or scattered. The great lion hunt reliefs of Ashurbanipal, once emblems of dominance, lay buried beneath ash and rubble. But was this merely a case of imperial overreach? Of too many enemies, too much land, and too little unity? Or was something more at play? Some scholars point to environmental stress. There are hints of drought in northern Mesopotamia during the late 7th century BC, an arid shift that may have undermined agriculture, strained supplies, and sparked unrest. Assyria's core regions, already exhausted by years of conquest, may have been less able to support its massive military machine. Others highlight religious fractures. Assyria's cultic identity was tied to Ashur, the national god, and to the king's semi-divine role. As the empire stretched across increasingly diverse populations with differing beliefs, did the spiritual unity begin to crack? And then there are the more speculative theories. Some wonder whether the speed and totality of Assyria's fall point to something deliberately concealed. That internal betrayal, perhaps by Assyrian elites, played a larger role than recorded. That the empire was not simply conquered, but hollowed out from within. Others ask why so little of Assyrian memory survived. Despite its cultural and military dominance, the empire was vilified in later accounts. The Bible speaks of Nineveh as a city of blood, a place cursed by God. Greek historians barely mention its fall. Even Babylonian records, detailed as they are, seem unusually cold, factual, but emotionless. It's as if the world chose to forget. But archaeology would not. In the 19th century, the ruins of Nineveh and Nimrud were unearthed from beneath mounds of earth and legend. The great winged bulls of the Assyrian gates, the Lamassu, emerged into light once more. Tablets from Ashurbanipal's library were translated, revealing lost epics like the Epic of Gilgamesh. And yet, for all we've recovered, the deeper questions remain unanswered. How could an empire so advanced, so brutal, so feared, fall so completely? And what does that fall tell us about the fragility of power itself? In the end, Assyria's final legacy may lie in its silence. The cities are dust, the language, long dead. The empire's own records boast of immortality, of kings who would never be forgotten. And yet, they were. Until the earth gave them back to us. Today, the land where Assyria once ruled is scarred by conflict, its ancient sites looted, its relics scattered. But the past is not lost. The fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire is not just a tale of conquest and rebellion. It is a mirror, reflecting the limits of empire, the danger of overreach, and the inevitability of change. And still the question lingers. What exactly brought the lion to its knees? And what truths still lie buried beneath the dust of Nineveh, waiting to be read? From the shattered palaces of Nineveh to the whispering heights of the Andes, we now ascend into a different kind of mystery. One carved not in stone tablets, but into the very bones of a highland landscape. Here, on the windswept plains near the southern shores of Lake Titicaca in present-day Bolivia, the ruins of an ancient city sprawl under open sky. Walls rise from the earth in strange, precise patterns. Stone blocks, some weighing many tons, lie scattered across the plateau. Carved faces gaze out in silence. Pillars stand like frozen sentinels, beneath a sky both vast and hauntingly still. This is Tiwanaku, and no one knows exactly who built it, or why it fell. Long before the rise of the Inca, Tiwanaku stood as the spiritual and political heart of a vast Andean civilization. Between roughly 500 and 1000 AD, it became the center of a sophisticated culture that spread its influence across much of the southern Andes into Peru, Chile, and Argentina. But by 1100 AD, it was gone. Not slowly fading into the background, but abandoned, its temples empty, its people scattered. Why? The city's location is one of its most intriguing features. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, It sits in a region few would expect to support a great civilization. The air is thin, the nights are cold. Yet here, the Tiwanaku people created monumental architecture, developed advanced agricultural systems, and maintained long-distance trade networks stretching from the Pacific coast to the Amazon basin. At the city's heart lies the Kalasasaya, an immense ceremonial platform flanked by monolithic gates and carved with enigmatic iconography. The most famous among these is the Gateway of the Sun, a single block of stone intricately etched with figures believed to represent calendar cycles, deities, and perhaps something more. Nearby, the Akapana Pyramid rises in tiered levels, once capped by water channels and ritual basins. Beneath it, a system of subterranean drainage suggests complex knowledge of hydrology, engineered to withstand the harsh climate of the Altiplano. And scattered throughout the site are carved heads, staring from the walls of sunken courts, each one distinct, perhaps representing different peoples absorbed into this cultural nexus. But who exactly were the Tiwanaku? They left behind no writing system, no known kings, no formal historical record. Their memory survives in pottery, in architecture, and in the oral traditions of the Andean peoples who came after. What we do know is that Tiwanaku was not merely a city. It was a ceremonial center, a place of pilgrimage, ritual, and cosmological alignment. Its design reflects a deep relationship with the movement of the sun, the solstices, and the cycles of water and earth. Some archaeologists believe the entire city functioned as a symbolic model of the Andean world, a fusion of sacred landscape and human order. But sometime between 1000 and 1100 AD, Tiwanaku collapsed. Mainstream explanations often begin with the climate. Ice core and sediment records from the region suggest a period of sustained drought beginning around 950 AD. For a society that depended on high-altitude agriculture, especially a complex system of raised fields and canals known as suka colas, this would have been catastrophic. Without sufficient rainfall, the potato and quinoa fields would have withered. The reservoirs would have dried. Famine, unrest, and migration would have followed. Yet Tiwanaku had thrived for centuries in a harsh environment. It had adapted before. Why couldn't it adapt again? Some scholars argue that the political structure of Tiwanaku may have been more fragile than it appeared. The city's spiritual authority, rooted in its role as a pilgrimage site, might have depended on its ability to maintain order, growth, and prosperity. If prolonged environmental stress undermined that image, it could have triggered internal fragmentation. Regional elites may have pulled away. Communities once held together by shared cosmology may have drifted apart. Still, the archaeological record tells us something curious. There's little evidence of violent conquest, no mass graves, no signs of widespread destruction or fire. The city was not sacked, it was simply left behind. So what happened? Some theorists propose that Tiwanaku was less a centralized state and more a loose federation held together by religion, trade, and ritual. If so, its collapse might have been gradual, its population slowly dispersing into surrounding valleys. Pieces of its culture may have been absorbed by later societies, including the Inca, who revered Lake Titicaca and spoke of ancient beings from the highlands. Others looked to the iconography carved into the stone, the so-called staff god figure repeated in temples and monoliths, surrounded by winged beings and stepped motifs. Was this a religious order that faded with time, or did it guard a system of knowledge we no longer understand? And then, there are more speculative voices. Some have noted the astonishing precision of Tiwanaku's stonework, joints so tight a knife cannot pass between them. Certain blocks appear cut with angles and notches more reminiscent of mechanical designs than simple tools. Were these simply the results of highly skilled craftsmanship? Or do they hint at techniques now lost? A few fringe theorists have gone further, suggesting astronomical alignments, advanced pre-Incan technology, even outside influence. But the evidence remains elusive, suggestive, not conclusive. The more we learn about Tiwanaku, the more it resists explanation. Why did such a monumental society arise in such an inhospitable place? How did it master its landscape, spread its influence, and vanish without a trace of war or conquest? And what might still lie buried beneath the windswept plateau, waiting for the next shovel, the next survey, the next insight? Today, Tiwanaku remains a quiet place. The wind moves through empty plazas. Lamas graze where priests once performed sacred rites. Tourists walk among monoliths whose meanings are long forgotten. And the question lingers in the thin Andean air. What truly caused the fall of Tiwanaku, and what parts of its story have yet to be uncovered from the silence of stone? As the sacred stones of Tiwanaku fade into the chill winds of the Andes, we now cross continents and centuries, stepping into the damp, mist-veiled hills of ancient Britannia, a land of brooding skies and restless borders, where rivers run dark beneath forest canopies, and stone forts cling to the edges of civilization. Here, nearly 2,000 years ago, an elite Roman legion, hardened by campaigns across the empire, marched into the north, and was never heard from again. The 9th Legion Hispana, a name etched in Roman military annals, a force of perhaps 5,000 trained men, veterans of brutal battles in Spain, Gaul, and Germany, soldiers of the empire's will. And yet, sometime after the year 108 AD, they vanish from the record. No mention of their fate, no return, only silence. What happened to them? We know the 9th was stationed in Britain for decades, helping to pacify a land that was never fully tamed. The Roman presence in the Isles began in 43 AD, under Emperor Claudius, but the north remained a frontier, dotted with tribal resistance and shifting alliances. The 9th was based at Eboracum, modern-day York, an important military center near the borderlands. And then, they disappear from official lists. Later, Roman documents mention other legions still active throughout the empire. But the 9th is gone, not reassigned, not renamed, just absent. Was it destroyed, recalled in disgrace, or quietly disbanded for reasons now forgotten? The mystery has fascinated historians for centuries and inspired legends. Some ancient clues suggest a violent end. Tacitus, writing in the early 2nd century, describes uprisings in northern Britain, fierce enough to threaten Rome's hold. The tribes of Caledonia, what is now Scotland, were never fully subdued. Could the 9th have marched north to suppress a rebellion and perished? A lost battle, a doomed campaign, an entire legion swallowed by the mists. It's a compelling theory, and for many, the most likely. But evidence is thin. No battlefield has been found, no mass grave, no inscriptions commemorating fallen heroes. Roman armies rarely disappeared without record, especially an entire legion. So where is the account of their end? Some argue that the 9th may not have died in Britain at all. Inscriptions discovered in the Netherlands and Germany suggest that at least part of the legion, or perhaps a detachment, was active on the continent after 108 AD. One damaged inscription from Nijmegen mentions the 9th, but it's unclear whether it refers to the full legion or a remnant. Could they have been transferred quietly, then absorbed or disbanded elsewhere? Other documents speak of the legion still being active as late as 130 AD, perhaps in the eastern provinces. But the trail is murky, uncertain, the evidence inconsistent. So we're left with possibilities. One is total annihilation, that the 9th was wiped out during a failed campaign in Britain's wild north, and that Rome, embarrassed by the loss, chose to omit or obscure the details. Silence, in this view, was a political decision, an effort to protect imperial prestige. Another theory is administrative, that the legion was broken up over time, its veterans reassigned, its name retired. No catastrophe. Just a slow dissolution that left no clear moment to record. And then, as always, there are the more speculative ideas. Some suggest that the legion defected, that internal conflict, poor leadership, or even mutiny led the Ninth to break from Rome entirely, that they vanished not by death, but by choice. A few fringe theories claim survivors of the Ninth fled and integrated with local tribes, abandoning the empire to live as Britons, leaving behind Latin discipline for something older, wilder. Oral traditions in parts of northern Britain hint at foreign warriors settling in the highlands, though nothing definitive links them to the Ninth. Others let imagination stretch further, that the legion wandered into some forbidden glen or cursed valley and was swallowed by the land itself, lost not just to history, but to the fabric of place. That Britain's dark woods and endless fog claimed them in a way no scroll could record. These are legends, of course. But legends often grow in the space where truth disappears. What we do know is that in the decades after the Ninth vanished, Rome built Hadrian's Wall, a vast frontier fortification dividing the empire from the untamed north. Was the wall a response to whatever fate befell the Ninth? A line drawn to prevent further disaster? Or was it simply part of a broader strategy, one that had nothing to do with the legion at all? The question remains. Today, York still stands, its Roman foundations buried beneath modern streets. Artifacts from the time of the Ninth have been unearthed. Coins, weapons, tiles stamped with the legion's mark. Proof that they were here. But no final chapter, no clear ending. What became of the Ninth? Were they slaughtered in a forgotten battle, their bones hidden beneath some unmarked field? Did they march eastward into the fog of imperial bureaucracy, lost not to war, but to paperwork? Or is there still some unexcavated truth lying silent beneath the moss and stone of northern Britain? Perhaps the real mystery is not only how they disappeared, but why no one chose to remember. And the question lingers, in every ruined fort and whispering moor. What happened to Rome's lost legion? And why has the land kept its secret so well? From the mist-wrapped hills of northern Britain and the vanished ranks of the Ninth Legion, we now travel east, across mountains, straits, and centuries, into the golden haze of myth and memory, to a city sung into legend, a war that may, or may not, have happened, and a question that still stirs debate among historians, archaeologists, and poets alike. The Trojan War. At the entrance to the Dardanelles, near the edge of modern-day Turkey, a low hill rises from the plain, unremarkable at first glance. But beneath this mound lie the layered ruins of ancient Troy, city upon city, civilization upon civilization, buried, rebuilt, and buried again. And somewhere among those stones may lie the truth behind one of history's greatest mysteries. The story is well known, told in Homer's Iliad, passed down through epic poetry and classical drama. A Greek prince named Paris steals away Helen, queen of Sparta. In response, the Greeks launch 1,000 ships, laying siege to Troy for 10 long years. Heroes clash: Achilles, Hector, Odysseus, Ajax. Gods intervene. The city falls, not by force, but by trickery, a wooden horse concealing warriors within. But how much of it is true? For centuries, Troy was thought to be purely myth, no more real than Atlantis. Homer, many believed, had crafted a world of gods and glory with no basis in reality. That changed in the 1870s, when amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann began excavating at Hisarlik. What he uncovered was astonishing: the ruins of a once mighty city, with fortifications, gates, and ash layers that hinted at fiery destruction. But which Troy was the Troy? The site held at least 9 major layers of settlement, each built atop the last, stretching back to the early Bronze Age. Scholars now believe that Troy 6 or 7a, dating to around 1300 to 1180 BC, best fits the timeline of the supposed war. These layers show signs of violent conflict, of walls breached, of sudden collapse. And yet, no definitive proof, no inscription mentioning Helen, no records of a Greek coalition, no Trojan horse, just walls and ruins, and echoes. Was there a war? Almost certainly. The late Bronze Age was a time of turmoil. Powerful kingdoms clashed across the Aegean and Near East. The Hittite archives, discovered in central Anatolia, mention a city called Wilusa, a name scholars link to Ilios, the Homeric name for Troy. They speak of conflict between Wilusa and a coalition known as Ahiyawa, which may refer to the Achaeans, Homer's Greeks. The pieces begin to align, not perfectly, but tantalizingly. Some suggest the war was real, but smaller, a local skirmish over trade routes, territory, or honor. Over time, oral traditions inflated it into an epic. A 10-year siege may have been 10 weeks. A stolen queen may have been a broken alliance. The heroes, real or not, became symbols. Others argue that the Iliad was never meant as history, but as a reflection of memory, of a lost world that was already ancient by Homer's time. A cultural echo, not a chronicle. If so, its truth lies not in the facts, but in the resonance. Still, the mysteries endure. Why would Homer describe a city so vividly if it didn't exist? How could he capture the geography, the rivers, the plains, the winds, so accurately? Could memories of the Bronze Age have survived centuries, passed down through generations of storytellers? And then there are the questions Homer never answered. Where exactly did the Greeks land? How was Troy fortified? Why did the war drag on for so long? Some archaeologists suggest that Troy's location at the entrance to the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, was strategically vital. Control of this passage meant influence over trade between the Aegean and the Black Sea. Could the war have been economic rather than romantic? Others examine the destruction layers of Troy 7a, noting signs of siege and sudden abandonment. But no mass graves, no arrowheads, no definitive evidence of large-scale battle. Was the city destroyed by war or earthquake? Schliemann himself complicated matters. His enthusiasm led him to dig too deeply, damaging upper layers in his rush to find Priam's Troy. In doing so, he may have destroyed critical evidence. What we've lost, we may never recover. And then there is the matter of the horse. Was it real? A siege engine? A misunderstood ritual offering? Or purely metaphor? The earliest references to the war, long before Homer, mention Troy's fall, but not the horse. It appears only later, in full form, in the Odyssey and other post-Homeric tales. A symbol of cunning? A myth layered onto history? Perhaps the war was not one event, but many, merged and reshaped in the crucible of oral tradition. Perhaps Troy itself is a composite, a memory of several cities, several conflicts, wrapped in a single narrative to preserve something deeper. Or perhaps, the truth still lies beneath the ground. Even today, excavations continue. Deeper layers, new technologies, fresh interpretations. With every discovery, the line between history and myth grows fainter. What really happened at Troy? Who fought there, and why? Was it love, ambition, revenge, or something altogether more human? In the quiet hill of Hisarlik, the stones still hold secrets. And as the wind moves through the ruins, one question remains. Did the walls of Troy fall to a wooden horse, or to time itself? From the smoldering ruins of Troy, we move now to a palace by the Nile, a place of perfume and politics, of silk-draped rooms and quiet intrigue, where marble columns opened to the Mediterranean breeze, and the fate of empires was whispered behind golden doors. This is Alexandria, and here, beneath vaulted ceilings and fading grandeur, the last pharaoh of Egypt met her end. Or so we are told. Cleopatra VII, queen, strategist, scholar, seductress, remains one of history's most enigmatic figures. She ruled not with brute force, but with calculation and charisma. She spoke multiple languages, navigated the deadly tides of Roman politics, and ensnared two of the most powerful men of her age, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But her final chapter is shrouded in ambiguity. It is 30 BC. The Roman world is shifting. Julius Caesar is dead. Mark Antony has been defeated by Octavian, soon to be Augustus, at the Battle of Actium. Egypt, once a proud and ancient kingdom, stands at the brink. In a final bid for autonomy, Cleopatra and Antony stage one last resistance from Alexandria. They fail. Antony, believing Cleopatra dead, falls on his sword, and Cleopatra, days later, follows him, at least according to the accounts. The official version, recorded by Roman historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio, is theatrical and deliberate. Cleopatra, draped in royal attire, retires to her private chamber. A venomous asp, hidden in a basket of figs, delivers the fatal bite. Her maids die alongside her, a romantic suicide, a tragic ending befitting a queen who defied the empire. But is that really what happened? The story, dramatic as it is, raises more questions than it answers. First, the ASP. The Egyptian cobra, or uraeus, symbol of divine royalty, plays a powerful symbolic role. But how would one smuggle such a deadly creature undetected? And could it really strike three people, Cleopatra and her two attendants, without struggle or chaos? Medical scholars point out that cobra venom can cause hours of suffering, convulsions, paralysis, a drawn-out death. But Roman sources speak of a peaceful, almost painless end, Cleopatra lying serene, as if merely asleep. Others suggest she may have used a poisoned hairpin or a fast-acting concoction prepared by her court physicians. Cleopatra was known for her interest in pharmacology and poisons. Some believe she may have experimented with lethal mixtures long before her death. So was the snake story a Roman invention, designed to cloak a politically awkward moment in poetic imagery? There's another possibility, one far less romantic, that Cleopatra didn't choose death, that she was murdered. Octavian, newly victorious, had much to gain from Cleopatra's removal. Her very presence posed a threat, both as a political figure and as a symbol of resistance. According to some sources, he had originally intended to parade her in his triumph in Rome, a humiliating fate she may have found unbearable. But others believe she was never meant to survive the conquest at all. Did Octavian orchestrate her death behind closed doors? And did he then craft the tale of noble suicide to satisfy Rome's appetite for drama? Or perhaps Cleopatra did take her own life, but not for the reasons we're told. Could her final act have been less about heartbreak and more about control? A final refusal to be paraded, imprisoned, or turned into propaganda? Then there is the question of the body. Where is Cleopatra now? Octavian allowed her and Antony to be buried together, at least according to the official record. But no tomb has ever been found. No mausoleum, no inscriptions, no mummified remains. Some believe she was buried in Alexandria, perhaps near the ruined temple of Taposiris Magna, where recent excavations have revealed tombs from her era. Others argue the burial site was deliberately hidden or destroyed. And in that absence, speculation grows. Was her body moved, hidden by loyalists, erased from history by Rome? A few have even proposed that Cleopatra faked her death, that she escaped in disguise, vanishing into exile, living out her days as a forgotten woman in a distant land. There's no evidence for this, only the irresistible pull of the unknown. What makes Cleopatra's death so mysterious is not simply the lack of clarity, but the layered meanings attached to it. To the Romans, she was an exotic temptress, a threat to order. Her death was necessary. To later generations, she became a feminist icon, a woman who refused to be conquered. Her death became a symbol of autonomy, dignity, and lost grandeur. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. A ruler at the end of her reign. A woman cornered by empire. A final decision made in private, with the world outside watching and guessing. Today, Cleopatra lives on in film, in theater, in art. But her tomb remains lost, her final moments still debated. And her story, despite its fame, is missing its final page. What really happened behind the silken curtains of her chamber? Was it a snake, a potion, a quiet dagger in the dark? Or was her death simply rewritten, shaped by those who wished her gone? In the absence of her voice, we are left with echoes, and one enduring question. Did Cleopatra choose her own end, or was it chosen for her by the empire that feared her most? From Cleopatra's veiled death along the Nile, we turn now inland, deep into the African continent, where dry grasses whisper over ancient stones, and the highland winds carry a silence older than memory. Here, in the southern heart of Africa, lie the ruins of a vanished city. Walls rise from the earth in elegant curves, unmortared and precise, some stretching over 30 feet high. Granite stones, laid by human hands, still hold their place after centuries. No metal binds them. No inscriptions explain them. This is Great Zimbabwe. And though its stones endure, its people are long gone. Located in the modern nation of Zimbabwe, a country named for this very site, Great Zimbabwe was once the political and spiritual center of a powerful kingdom. Between the 11th and 15th centuries AD, it flourished. Its influence stretched over hundreds of miles. Its rulers controlled trade routes that connected the African interior to the ports of the Swahili coast and beyond, to Arabia, India, even China. Gold, ivory, cattle, iron. These flowed out. Ceramics, glass beads, and silk flowed in. And then, sometime around 1450, the city was abandoned. Why? At its peak, Great Zimbabwe housed an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 people. It was a thriving urban center, the largest stone structure south of the Sahara. Its architecture reveals advanced knowledge of engineering and design. The massive walls of the great enclosure, with their curved lines and narrow passageways, suggest ceremonial as well as defensive functions. A separate hilltop complex, called the Hill Complex, served as a royal residence or spiritual site. The layout hints at a society with both hierarchy and ritual depth. But the most remarkable feature of Great Zimbabwe is not what remains, but what doesn't. There are no written records, no names of kings, no chronicles of daily life. The people who built and ruled this city left no texts, only pottery shards, tools, and the enduring silence of stone. So what drove this great center of civilization to be left behind? Several mainstream explanations have been proposed. Environmental degradation is one. The population may have grown too large for the local land to support. Soil erosion and deforestation, driven by farming and the demand for firewood, may have exhausted the resources of the surrounding area. Overgrazing could have made the land less productive. As agricultural yields declined, people may have been forced to move elsewhere. Another theory is political fragmentation. Great Zimbabwe may have been part of a larger, shifting network of regional powers. When the city's central authority weakened, perhaps due to internal disputes or changing trade dynamics, its inhabitants may have left to form new centers of power, such as those found in the Mutapa Kingdom to the north. Then, there is trade itself. Great Zimbabwe's prosperity was built on its role as a middle point between the interior and the Indian Ocean trade routes. If trade routes shifted, or if new centers along the coast emerged and drew away merchants, Zimbabwe's importance could have declined rapidly. But these explanations, while plausible, don't fully account for the speed and scale of the city's abandonment. Why not rebuild? Why not adapt? And why leave so little trace of what had once been? There are other mysteries too. Among the artifacts found at Great Zimbabwe are items that suggest a wider world of interaction. A Chinese porcelain shard, Persian glassware, a coin from Kilwa. These fragments hint at a civilization deeply connected to global currents. And yet, its story was nearly erased from the historical record. In fact, for many years, colonial narratives denied that Great Zimbabwe had been built by Africans at all. European explorers and scholars in the 19th and early 20th centuries proposed, without evidence, that the ruins were the work of outsiders, Phoenicians, Arabs, or even survivors of lost civilizations. These theories, rooted more in prejudice than evidence, persisted for generations before being thoroughly discredited by archaeological research. Today, we know the ancestors of the Shona people built Great Zimbabwe. The culture was African, indigenous, sophisticated. But even with that clarity, the question of why it was left behind remains unanswered. Some scholars suggest a slow and voluntary migration, that the city's elite chose to move, founding new centers of power while leaving the ceremonial core behind. Others posit a shift in spiritual beliefs, prompting the abandonment of sacred architecture as political and religious systems evolved. More speculative theories exist as well. Was there a climatic event, a prolonged drought or epidemic that struck the city suddenly? Or perhaps the site's spiritual importance changed, and Great Zimbabwe was left as a sacred relic, deliberately untouched. Some local traditions speak of the city with reverence, as a place of ancestors or spirits. In this view, the ruins were not deserted in haste, but transitioned into a different kind of space, not abandoned, but retired. And yet, for all we've uncovered through excavation and analysis, Great Zimbabwe holds tight to its final secret. Today, its curved walls still embrace the land. The sun casts long shadows over stone steps once climbed by kings and priests. Birds call from the hilltops. Tourists walk its paths, but the city does not speak. There are no chronicles, no battle scars, no fire-blackened layers. Just the question, why did one of Africa's greatest cities fall silent? And what might still lie beneath the earth, waiting to whisper the truth of a forgotten kingdom? As the sun sets behind the ruined towers of Great Zimbabwe, casting long shadows over a vanished kingdom, we now journey northeast, into the sands of the Arabian desert, where wind whistles through rock-hewn corridors and ancient facades glow gold beneath the desert light. Carved directly into the rose-red cliffs of Jordan lies Petra, a city seemingly born from stone itself. Massive tombs and temples loom high above the valley floor, columns and cornices chiseled with masterful precision. Narrow canyons open suddenly into wide plazas, revealing architectural marvels like Al-Khazne, the so-called treasury, its facade frozen in time. Nearby, the monastery stands like a forgotten monument to gods, whose names are no longer spoken. This was the heart of the Nabatean kingdom. And yet today, Petra is silent. Its people, gone. Who were the Nabateans? They were master traders, skilled engineers, and mysterious builders who thrived from the 4th century BC until their sudden and quiet decline in the 2nd century AD. Their cities emerged where few dared settle, across arid landscapes stretching from the Sinai to northern Arabia. Yet they made these places flourish. Petra, their capital, became one of the great cities of the ancient world, not through war or conquest, but through commerce. The Nabateans controlled the incense routes that brought frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia, and traded goods ranging from silk and spices to bitumen and copper. Their influence stretched from Damascus to the Red Sea. They built cisterns, dams, and channels that captured and distributed water with astonishing precision, turning dry gorges into thriving urban centers. They developed their own script, minted coins, and blended Hellenistic, Arabian, and Mesopotamian elements into a distinctive culture. And then, almost without warning, they vanished. By the mid-2nd century AD, the Nabatean kingdom had been absorbed into the Roman Empire. In 106 AD, Emperor Trajan annexed the region, and it was renamed Arabia Petraea. The takeover appears to have been peaceful. There are no records of battle or destruction, but the Nabateans themselves fade quickly from the record after that. So what happened? Mainstream explanations point to Rome's growing dominance in the region. As Roman roads redirected trade routes and new cities like Palmyra rose to prominence, Petra's importance may have waned. With no need for middlemen, Rome began to trade directly with southern Arabia and the Indian Ocean ports. Economic decline, in this view, led to political obscurity. But that may only be part of the story. Petra remained occupied for several more centuries, at least into the Byzantine period. Churches were built, inscriptions continued. But the vibrancy of Nabatean culture, the language, the art, the distinct architectural style, began to erode. Why? Some scholars suggest that Roman integration diluted Nabatean identity. That local elites gradually adopted Roman customs, and the unique fabric of the kingdom unraveled from within. Others believe the region's vulnerability to earthquakes played a role. A major quake in 363 AD damaged many of Petra's structures and aqueducts. If the water systems failed, so too would the city's viability. Still, it's the cultural silence that puzzles many. Why did the Nabateans, so advanced in their time, leave so little behind? Why do we have no detailed records from their own hand? No histories, no religious texts, no explanation of who they were? Was their decline a slow assimilation or a sudden vanishing? Archaeologists have uncovered clues. Temples to Dushara and Al-Uzza, gods whose roles are still debated. Burial chambers with elaborate designs, but no clear inscriptions. Pottery and art that suggest a deep understanding of both their own traditions and foreign influences. But the full picture remains elusive. The more we learn about the Nabateans, the more they slip between definitions. They were not just desert traders. They were astronomers, stonemasons, and political diplomats. Their city of Petra was more than a market stop. It was a ceremonial hub, an urban masterpiece, and perhaps even a sacred landscape shaped by cosmological alignments. Some believe Petra's key monuments were constructed to mark solstices and equinoxes, casting shadows in precisely calculated patterns. If so, what did they believe? What were their myths, their rituals? Why do their gods vanish so completely? Some fringe theories suggest a deliberate withdrawal, that the Nabateans, sensing the encroaching force of Rome and the collapse of the incense economy, chose to disappear, to migrate, to scatter, to shed their identity before it could be conquered. Others entertain the idea that they were absorbed not only by the Roman Empire, but by mystery cults, disappearing into the very religions they may have once influenced. And then there are those who see echoes of the Nabateans in later traditions. Faint traces in Arab folklore, in architectural motifs, in linguistic shifts that hint at an influence not yet fully understood. Today, Petra draws visitors from around the world. But beyond its stunning facades and towering tombs lies an absence, a silence not of nature, but of history. We do not know what became of the last Nabatean king. We do not know where their libraries were kept, if they existed at all. And we do not know why a civilization so resourceful, so adaptive, so uniquely positioned, left so little of its inner voice behind. Was it erased, forgotten, or simply never written down? In the golden light of Petra's narrow canyons, as shadows stretch across ancient steppes, the mystery deepens. Why did the Nabateans disappear? And what truths might still lie buried beneath the sand, waiting for their story to be told at last? From the wind-carved tombs of Petra, where the Nabateans left their kingdom of stone and silence, we cross a vast ocean, into the heart of the Pacific, where one of humanity's most remote islands holds one of its most enduring mysteries. Rapa Nui, Easter Island, a solitary speck in the sea, more than 2,000 miles from the nearest continental shore. Here, amid rolling hills and volcanic craters, hundreds of colossal stone statues, called moai, stand watch over the land. Their faces are solemn, elongated, and deeply expressive. Their backs turned to the ocean, they face inward, toward the island's heart, as if gazing at something we can no longer see. Some weigh over 80 tons. Many were carved from a single quarry at Rano Raraku, and almost all were moved, miles across the island, often over rugged terrain. But how? And why? This question, the transport of the moai, has fascinated explorers, researchers, and storytellers for centuries. Because while carving the statues from volcanic tuff was an immense feat in itself, moving them may have been even more extraordinary. Easter Island lacks draft animals. No horses, no oxen. The Rapa Nui people had only their own strength, ropes, logs, and ingenuity. Yet these massive figures, some as tall as a 3-story building, were moved miles from the quarry, many set on ceremonial platforms known as ahu. Early European visitors assumed the moai were hauled on wooden sledges or dragged on rollers. Some believed vast forests had been felled for this purpose, contributing to deforestation and the island's eventual ecological collapse. This theory, dramatic and tragic, became the dominant narrative for decades. But local oral traditions tell a different story. The moai, the Rapa Nui elders said, walked. They were not dragged. They were not hauled. They moved upright, swaying side to side like a living thing. At first, this seemed poetic, symbolic language for ritual or myth. But modern researchers have begun to reconsider it, not as metaphor, but as method. In recent years, experiments by archaeologists such as Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo have shown that with a small team and strong ropes, a moai replica can indeed be walked upright in a controlled rocking motion, like a refrigerator being moved across a floor. Their tests suggest that the statue's center of gravity and tapered base were not accidental. They were designed to move this way. If true, the walking moai theory reshapes not only how the statues were transported, but how the Rapa Nui thought about them. These were not just monuments. They were sacred beings, animated through ritual and effort. Moving them was not only engineering, it was ceremony. And yet, mysteries remain. Why undertake such a massive effort? Why build so many moai, over 900, and transport them across an island so small? Some believe the moai were ancestral figures, guardian spirits watching over the clans. Their gaze turned inward, not toward the sea, but toward the villages and gardens of the living. Erecting a moai may have been an act of honor and protection, a way to anchor lineage and identity. But others suggest deeper meanings. Were the moai aligned to celestial events? Some scholars argue that certain platforms may mark solstices or lunar cycles, tying the statues not just to ancestry, but to time itself. And then there is the question of the unfinished moai, dozens still lying at Rano Raraku, partially carved, abandoned in stone. Why were they left behind? Were they damaged? Or did something interrupt the process? Something sudden, something final? The collapse of Rapa Nui society has long been a subject of debate. Deforestation, soil erosion, and internal conflict likely played roles. Some moai were later toppled, deliberately, perhaps during times of upheaval, when old beliefs gave way to new struggles. The very monuments once revered were cast down. And yet, many remain upright, re-erected, restored, remembered. Still, some researchers propose more speculative theories, that the moai may encode forgotten knowledge, geometric, symbolic, or even astronomical, that their forms represent more than people, but cosmic order. A few have gone further still, suggesting the influence of outside visitors, foreign mariners, unknown seafarers, though no credible evidence supports these ideas. The truth, as ever, lies in the silence of stone. The moai stand, their faces worn by centuries of wind and rain, their expressions unreadable. But they speak in their own way, of belief, of labor, of something we may never fully understand. Why did the Rapa Nui build them? Why so many? And why continue, even as their resources dwindled? What did the walking of a moai mean to those who moved it, step by step, across the earth? Was it an offering, a duty, a dialogue between the living and the dead? Or was it something else entirely? A ritual whose meaning was carried not in words, but in rhythm and motion. Today, as the Pacific winds move through grassy fields and seabirds circle above, the moai remain, still, watching, waiting. And the question endures: what truly walked across Easter Island? Stone statues or something more? As the moai of Easter Island gaze inward in eternal silence, we shift now to the scorching sands of ancient Egypt, where another figure once challenged tradition, reshaped belief, and vanished into a mystery that still unsettles historians today. Pharaoh Akhenaten. His name echoes through time like a riddle whispered through the walls of ruined temples. He was a revolutionary, a heretic, a divine dreamer, or perhaps something else entirely. The story begins in the 14th century BC, during the height of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Akhenaten ascended the throne as Amenhotep IV, but soon cast aside the old gods, the old temples, and the very structure of Egyptian belief. In their place, he elevated a single deity, Aten, the sun disk, visible, abstract, and all-encompassing. He changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. He moved the capital to a new city in the desert, Akhetaten, known today as Amarna. He built temples open to the sky, rejected Amun and the priesthood, and ruled in a way no other pharaoh had before. His art was different, intimate, strange, at times unsettling. He is portrayed with elongated limbs, narrow shoulders, full lips, and wide hips. The royal family is shown in tender moments, cradling children beneath the rays of Aten. It was a style so radically different that scholars still debate whether it was symbolic or literal. And then, somewhere around 1336 BC, Akhenaten died. But what followed was not royal ceremony, it was erasure. His successors dismantled his city. His name was scratched from monuments, his statues defaced, his religion suppressed. The traditional gods returned. The capital moved back to Thebes. It was as if Akhenaten had never existed. Even his tomb, his final resting place, remains shrouded in uncertainty. He had built a royal tomb in the cliffs near Amarna, much like the tombs of Thebes, yet bearing its own artistic signature. Fragments of inscriptions suggest he was buried there, perhaps alongside one of his daughters. But his mummy has never been conclusively identified. Some say his body was moved in the aftermath of his death, taken to Thebes, reburied in secret, or destroyed by those who saw him as a threat to the old order. Others suggest his tomb was never completed, or that his burial was a rushed affair amid political turmoil. In 1907, the mummy of a man was discovered in Tomb K Vifith 55 in the Valley of the Kings. The body had been defiled, its name erased, its sarcophagus desecrated. Some believe it to be Akhenaten. DNA analysis has linked this mummy to Tutankhamun, suggesting a close familial relationship, likely father and son. But other questions remain. The KV-55 mummy was estimated to be in his early 20s or 30s at death, while Akhenaten is thought to have ruled for 17 years and had teenage children. Could the mummy belong to someone else entirely? Perhaps Smenkhare, a shadowy figure who may have co-ruled near the end of Akhenaten's reign? And what of Akhenaten's mysterious successor, Neferneferuaten, who ruled briefly before Tutankhamun? Was this his wife, Nefertiti, stepping into power under a new name? Or another daughter, or co-regent? Even his family relationships defy easy answers. Akhenaten's wife, the famed Nefertiti, is immortalized in sculpture, yet her final years are undocumented. Did she die before him? Rule after him? Was she buried with him? Or somewhere else entirely? Then there is the matter of Akhenaten's vision. What drove him to abandon centuries of religious tradition? To build a city from nothing? To isolate Egypt spiritually and politically? Some believe he was a spiritual reformer, genuinely inspired by a divine experience. Others see him as a political disruptor, breaking the power of the Amun priesthood to consolidate authority. And a few wonder if his beliefs had more mystical origins, shaped by astronomical cycles or foreign influence. Was Akhenaten a prophet ahead of his time, or a failed idealist whose vision died with him? And if he was buried, where is he? No confirmed remains, no intact tomb, only fragments, shards of alabaster, damaged inscriptions, a sarcophagus whose face was chiseled away. What secrets did his successors bury along with his memory? Some fringe theories suggest that Akhenaten's rejection of traditional deities and emphasis on one, abstract god, may have influenced later monotheistic traditions. His legacy, suppressed in Egypt, may have echoed beyond it. While most scholars find this unlikely, the idea lingers in the margins, part history, part myth. The real enigma lies not only in what Akhenaten believed, but in how completely his world was dismantled. Other pharaohs left legacies etched into obelisks and temples. Akhenaten left a vacuum, a silence where a story should be. And so we are left with a sunlit city abandoned to sand, a god without a temple, and a king whose body has never truly been found. Was he buried with honor, left in the desert to be forgotten, or hidden for a reason? In the fading light of Amarna's cliffs, the wind moves through broken columns and shattered lintels. And the question remains, where lies Akhenaten, pharaoh, heretic, visionary? And what truths still lie sealed beneath the sands of the forgotten city he dared to build? As the shadow of Akhenaten fades beneath the sands of Amarna, we journey westward, to the edge of the ancient world, where the land meets the Atlantic and myth bleeds into memory. In the salt-laced winds of southern Iberia, amid river deltas and sunlit marshes, lies the ghost of a civilization that once dazzled its neighbors, and then disappeared. Tartessos. The Greeks spoke of it as a rich and noble kingdom beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a land of gold, silver, and tin, a place of music, law, and learning. A city, perhaps, at the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, where traders from the Aegean and the Levant once docked in search of precious metals and exotic goods. But today, no one knows for certain where Tartessos stood, or why it vanished. The earliest references come from Greek writers like Herodotus, who called the Tartessians a civilized people governed by wise kings. He names one in particular, Arganthonios, said to have ruled for 80 years. Though such longevity may be poetic, it suggests a ruler remembered for stability, for prosperity, and perhaps, for greatness. Archaeologically, traces of a Tartessian culture begin to emerge around 900 BC. Their presence is strongest in southwestern Spain, particularly near modern-day Huelva and Cadiz. They were skilled metalworkers, renowned for their mastery of bronze, silver, and gold. The region is rich in mineral deposits, and Tartessos may have been among the first societies in Western Europe to build an economy on mining and metallurgy. Artifacts found in the area, ornate jewelry, complex ceramics, and inscribed bronze plaques, suggest a unique fusion of local Iberian traditions with Eastern Mediterranean influences. Some scholars believe the Tartessians interacted with the Phoenicians, who established colonies along the coast and brought with them writing, seafaring technology, and new religious ideas. And then, sometime after 500 BC, the Tartessians disappear from the record. Not slowly, not gradually, but almost at once. Their cities fall silent. Their name vanishes from Greek texts. Their culture, so vivid in its brief arc, dissolves without explanation. What happened? Several mainstream theories have been proposed. One suggests environmental change, perhaps catastrophic flooding in the Guadalquivir Delta, rendering the region uninhabitable. The Tartessian heartland was marshy and low-lying. A massive storm surge, a shift in river flow, or rising sea levels could have submerged critical settlements. Another possibility is economic collapse. Tartessos thrived in part due to its trade in metals, but over time, new trade routes developed. Carthage, rising in power, may have redirected commerce away from the Atlantic. If the Tartessians lost control of the mineral trade, their economy could have unraveled. Some historians believe the Carthaginians may have played a more direct role. As Phoenician influence gave way to Carthaginian dominance, it's possible that Tartessos, either by resisting or simply standing in the way, was crushed. The destruction may have been swift and deliberate, erasing a rival and securing control over the lucrative mines of Iberia. But there is no record of such a conquest. No ruins marked by fire and blade. No Carthaginian boast of victory. Only silence. A few scholars propose that Tartessos did not vanish, but transformed. That its people moved inland, evolving into the Turdetani, another Iberian tribe mentioned by Roman sources. If so, the disappearance was cultural, not physical. The identity faded, the name lost, but the lineage endured. Yet others are not so sure. Was Tartessos more myth than history? A Western echo of Eastern grandeur? Some have drawn comparisons between Tartessos and Plato's Atlantis, another legendary civilization located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, lost to cataclysm. The parallels are tempting. A wealthy society destroyed in a single stroke, remembered only in second-hand accounts. There is no proof. But the overlap in geography and mystery continues to inspire speculation. Archaeologists continue to search for Tartessos. Promising sites like El Carambolo near Seville have yielded exquisite artifacts, golden diadems, ritual objects, and inscriptions that hint at a lost complexity. But no city, no capital, no definitive seat of the Tartessian kings has yet been found. Where was Arganthonios buried? Where were the laws of Tartessos written? What became of the people who once ruled the far western edge of the known world? Some believe the answers lie buried in the wetlands, under sediment, under centuries of river drift. Others think Tartessos may have been a network of smaller settlements rather than a single grand city, making it harder to identify in the archaeological record. And still, the name endures. Tartessos, spoken by Greeks, remembered by Romans, chased by modern historians, a kingdom of gold and silence, a culture touched by foreign ideas, yet distinct and proud, a name without a body. Why did Tartessos vanish? Was it swallowed by water, erased by war? Or did it simply change, losing its name while its people lived on? In the orange glow of Iberia's setting sun, the marshlands glisten with ancient quiet. And somewhere beneath that shimmering surface, the memory of a vanished world waits, still unsolved, still unseen, still asking to be found. From the fading mists of Tartessos, whispered through Iberian marshlands and golden relics, we now turn eastward, into the cragged highlands where Anatolia meets the Caucasus, and snow-capped peaks stand guard over one of history's most mysterious forgotten kingdoms, Urartu. A name few today recognize, yet in the first millennium BC, it echoed through the stone corridors of citadels and across the embattled frontiers of empires. Centered around Lake Van in what is now eastern Turkey, Urartu was a kingdom of formidable fortresses, sacred temples, and masterful engineers. For a time, it stood toe-to-toe with mighty Assyria. And then, it vanished. The ruins of Urartian cities still cling to mountaintops and cliffsides. Cyclopean stone walls, built without mortar, rise in sharp angles above valleys. Inscriptions in a script borrowed and adapted from Assyria remain etched into basalt slabs. Prayers, royal decrees, and records of conquest. Their language, Urartian, survives only in these carvings. It has no known descendants. No living tongue connects us to it. Who were these mountain kings, and why did their story end so abruptly? Urartu emerged around the 9th century BC, rising from the ashes of earlier tribes and kingdoms in the Armenian highlands. Its rulers, beginning with Arame and peaking under kings like Menua and Argishti Tharis, unified scattered territories and built a sophisticated network of cities, roads, canals, and fortifications. Their architecture was bold and enduring. Their irrigation systems, carved into stone and stretching across rugged terrain, remain functional to this day. Their capital, Tushpa, modern-day Van, was a citadel carved into rock, overlooking the vast blue of the lake below. Here, temples to the storm, god Haldi, were erected, adorned with bronze shields and sacred altars. The kingdom's iconography blended native beliefs with Mesopotamian influences, producing a culture that was both unique and cosmopolitan. Urartu was a military state, fiercely independent and often in conflict with the Assyrians to the south. Battles raged along borders, cities changed hands, and yet, despite the pressure, Urartu held its own for nearly 3 centuries, until it didn't. By the early 6th century BC, the kingdom had all but disappeared. There was no grand conquest recorded, no decisive final battle, just a blank space where a nation had stood. So what happened? One of the most widely accepted theories is invasion. The Medes, a rising Iranian power allied with the Babylonians, swept across the region after the fall of Assyria in 612 BC. Their military campaigns likely reached Urartian territory. Some inscriptions hint at destruction and upheaval. Cities show signs of sudden abandonment or burning. But no detailed accounts remain. The Medes left little in the way of written history. Their presence is inferred, not confirmed. Others suggest internal decline. The Urartian state may have suffered from political fragmentation, economic exhaustion, or dynastic instability. Their dependence on centralized planning and monumental building may have become unsustainable over time. With weakened leadership, local rulers may have broken away, leaving the kingdom vulnerable to outside forces. Still others point to environmental stress. The region's harsh winters, volcanic activity, and earthquake-prone landscape could have played a role. Crop failures, disrupted trade routes, or changing climate conditions may have weakened the population's resilience. A slow unraveling rather than a swift collapse. But there are deeper mysteries as well. What became of the Urartians themselves? Unlike the Assyrians or the Egyptians, they left no sprawling historical narratives, no epic tales. Their inscriptions are terse and formal. Their stories, if ever told, have not survived. Some believe the people of Urartu were not destroyed, but absorbed, melting into the cultures that came after. The Armenians, who rose in the same region shortly after Urartu's fall, may have inherited their lands, infrastructure, and even aspects of their language and mythology. Indeed, some Armenian historians consider Urartu to be a Proto-Armenian kingdom. But the linguistic transition is unclear, and the cultural lineage is more suggestive than definitive. Others ask whether Urartu's disappearance was not due to conquest or decline, but deliberate erasure. Could their monuments have been repurposed, their names replaced, their gods forgotten as new faiths rose? Some fringe theories even suggest that Urartu's silence hides a more symbolic fate, that it was a civilization caught between worlds, never quite Mesopotamian, never fully Indo-European. A kingdom whose story was too remote, too mountainous, too different to be remembered clearly. And then there is the enduring enigma of the Urartian script. Though its signs are largely deciphered, and many royal inscriptions can be translated, the language itself remains only partially understood. It is agglutinative, dense, and without close relatives. Entire dimensions of meaning may be lost to us, locked behind syntax, and sound no longer spoken. Could the final clues to Urartu's fate lie hidden in stone texts we cannot yet fully read? Today, archaeologists continue to unearth fortresses, temples, and tools that testify to Urartu's reach and refinement. But their graves remain largely undisturbed. Their cities lie quiet, their gods unnamed. A kingdom that defied empires, that built in stone to last forever. Now remembered only in fragments. Why did Urartu fall? Where did its people go? And what secrets do those highland citadels still guard, beneath layers of time and silence? The mountains remember, but they do not speak, and so the kingdom of Urartu waits, its voice still buried beneath stone and sky. As the mountain stones of Urartu crumble beneath forgotten citadels, we descend southward, into the arid basin of the Jordan Valley. Here, beneath the blazing sun and endless desert sky, lie the silent shores of the Dead Sea. A place of ancient salt and seismic stillness, where legend and land seem to converge. Somewhere in this desolate expanse, it is said, stood two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. Names that conjure fire and judgment. Cities long vanished, yet immortalized in sacred texts and whispered across millennia. According to the book of Genesis, they were places of great wickedness, destroyed by divine wrath, their ruins buried beneath salt and ash. But was there more than myth to this destruction? The biblical account is vivid and haunting. Abraham pleads with God to spare the righteous. Angels visit Lot, who flees the city with his family. Then, in a flash, fire rains from the sky. Sodom and Gomorrah are consumed. Smoke rises like that of a furnace. Lot's wife looks back and is turned to a pillar of salt. The imagery is apocalyptic, but the questions it raises are enduring. Where were these cities? What caused their destruction? And did they ever truly exist? Over the centuries, many have searched for answers. Most scholars place Sodom and Gomorrah near the southern end of the Dead Sea, once a fertile region known in ancient times as the cities of the plain. Archaeological sites such as Bab ed-Dara and Numera, located along the Lisan Peninsula, have been proposed as possible candidates. Both were Bronze Age settlements, abandoned abruptly around 2350 BC. Both show signs of intense fire and destruction. Numera, in particular, was walled, densely built, and burned so completely that its inhabitants never returned. But are these the cities of the biblical tale? The match is compelling, but not conclusive. Other sites, like Tel El Hammam in Jordan, have drawn attention in recent years. Excavations there have revealed a sophisticated urban center dating to the Middle Bronze Age, complete with monumental architecture, fortifications, and evidence of sudden, high-temperature devastation. Melted bricks, pottery shards fused by heat, and a layer of ash suggest a cataclysmic event. Radiocarbon dating places the destruction around 1650 BC, centuries after the collapse of Bab ed-Dra and Numera, yet still within the blurred timeframes of oral tradition. What could have caused such devastation? One theory is geological. The region sits atop multiple fault lines, and the Dead Sea itself lies within the Great Rift Valley, a zone prone to seismic activity. A massive earthquake could have triggered landslides, released flammable gases, or even ignited sulfur deposits. Some suggest that bitumen, common in the area, may have ignited during a quake, sending fire and debris into the sky. Could this explain the fire and brimstone of the biblical account? Perhaps. Others look skyward. In recent years, scientists have examined the possibility that a cosmic event, a meteor or comet airburst, could have been responsible. Much like the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, a large object exploding in the atmosphere could flatten cities, incinerate landscapes, and leave behind extreme heat damage, all without a crater. Supporters of this theory point to the microscopic spherules and shocked quartz found at Tel El Hammam, which may indicate exposure to temperatures far beyond what fire alone could cause. Some researchers argue that such an event, witnessed and passed down through generations, could have seeded the story of divine destruction. Still, this too remains a hypothesis. Intriguing, but not universally accepted. There are also voices, quiet but persistent, that suggest Sodom and Gomorrah may never have existed as literal cities at all, but as symbolic archetypes. That the biblical account, while rooted in memory, may serve a moral and theological purpose rather than historical record. A warning cloaked in narrative. But then, why does the land itself seem to remember something? Why do ruins lie buried near the salt flats, where nothing now grows? Why does the Dead Sea region bear traces of sudden abandonment? Some have noted that the landscape itself plays a role in the mystery. The heavy air, the stillness, the silence. It feels like a place removed from time, where the past presses against the surface of the present. And then there is the Pillar of Salt. High on a ridge overlooking the valley stands a towering salt formation, shaped uncannily like a human figure. Locals call it Lot's wife. Scientists call it coincidence. But for those who look up at it from the valley floor, the boundary between legend and stone begins to blur. What truth lies beneath the salt, the ash, the layers of time? Were Sodom and Gomorrah real cities, destroyed by disaster, natural or celestial? Were they allegories, given form in the minds of ancient storytellers? Or were they something in between, a real memory, reshaped into myth? As the sun dips behind the cliffs of the Dead Sea, casting golden light across a lifeless shoreline, one thing is certain: The cities are gone. The earth remembers, and the silence still burns. What then destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah? Was it wrath, or nature, or something else entirely? And could the truth still lie buried beneath the salt, waiting to speak again? From the barren salt flats near the Dead Sea, where fire once rained from the sky, we now cross oceans and centuries to the American Southwest. Here, beneath the relentless sun of the Sonoran Desert, an ancient puzzle stretches across the arid earth in silent channels of dust and stone. The Hohokam Canals. Etched into what is now central Arizona, these intricate waterways once coursed with life. Dug by hand over centuries, they formed one of the most complex pre-industrial irrigation networks in North America. Long before Phoenix rose from the desert, before concrete and asphalt, there were these canals, lined with silt, shaded by mesquite, and carrying water from the Salt and Gila rivers across a vast, dry land. And then, sometime around 1450 AD, the water stopped flowing. The people who had lived here for over 1,000 years were gone. Why? The Hohokam were remarkable engineers. Beginning as early as 300 BC, they developed a system of irrigation that would eventually span hundreds of miles, diverting river water to fields of corn, beans, squash, and cotton. At their peak, their largest canals reached over 20 feet wide and 10 feet deep, dug entirely with stone tools and baskets. They maintained this system for centuries, adapting, expanding, and rebuilding with the flow of time and water. Their communities were centered around platform mounds, ball courts, and village compounds. Trade routes stretched across the desert, connecting them to the Pacific coast and Mesoamerica. They left behind intricate pottery, etched shells, and a culture woven into the land. And then, they left. Archaeologists still debate what exactly happened. One widely accepted theory points to environmental stress. A series of prolonged droughts may have pushed the system beyond its limits. Without reliable rainfall or snowmelt to feed the rivers, canal water would have slowed, sediment would have built up, and irrigation failures would have followed. But the Hohokam were no strangers to the harshness of desert life. Their survival depended on their ability to adapt to these fluctuations. For over 1,000 years, they did just that. So what changed? Some researchers suggest that the problem was not just drought, but flooding. In years when the Salt and Gila rivers swelled beyond control, entire canal systems may have been damaged or destroyed. The larger and more complex the system became, the more vulnerable it was to disruption. There's also evidence of social strain. As the Hohokam population grew, so did their dependence on the canals. Communities far from the river became increasingly reliant on a steady supply of water, and on those who controlled its flow. With stress came tension. Elites may have risen to manage irrigation and distribution, creating divisions that fractured the social fabric. When the water systems failed, political stability may have collapsed with them. Archaeological evidence hints at this decline. In some places, carefully maintained canals show signs of neglect. Silted-in beds, breached walls, fields left unplanted. Villages that once thrived begin to disappear from the record. Trade routes go quiet. And then, abruptly, the entire system is abandoned. Still, there are no signs of war. No mass graves. No cities burned or besieged. Just silence. Other scholars point to cultural transformation. The abandonment may not have been a sudden collapse, but a slow migration, a decision to move away, to leave the canals, and begin again elsewhere. This theory sees the end not as failure, but as a shift in identity. Some of the people who lived in the region after the fall of the canal system, such as the O'odham, may be descendants of the Hohokam. Oral traditions among local tribes speak of great irrigation works and migrations from the river valleys. Perhaps the knowledge was never truly lost, only carried forward in different forms. And yet, the scale of what was left behind still confounds. Why were the canals, so carefully maintained for so long, abandoned so completely? Could something else have played a role? Some have speculated about epidemic disease, carried along trade routes from distant lands. Others suggest a cosmic event, perhaps a volcanic eruption or climate anomaly that shifted regional weather patterns more dramatically than expected. Though no definitive evidence exists, the suddenness of the abandonment invites the question. There are also fringe theories, ideas that speak more to the mystery than the material record. Some see the Hohokam as part of a larger lost culture, connected to Mesoamerican centers or even pre-Columbian transoceanic visitors. While these claims remain unsubstantiated, they speak to the deep sense of wonder that the canal systems evoke. How did these people, without metal tools or wheeled carts, create and sustain such an ambitious hydraulic network? And what might still lie beneath the desert floor, buried by flood, wind, and time? Today, much of Phoenix follows the paths first carved by Hohokam hands. Modern canals often trace the roots dug centuries ago, though few realize the ancient legacy beneath the concrete. The desert remembers, the riverbanks hold whispers, and the channels, now dry, still curve across the land like veins of memory. What led to the abandonment of the Hohokam canals? Was it drought, flood, conflict, or something more subtle and unseen? And what stories remain, written not in books, but in the patterns of soil, stone, and silence? The mystery flows onward, like water lost beneath the sand, waiting to rise again.
you.